Chapter 341, Punishment and Resignation. Dumbledore, Umbridge began, her eyes slowly opening. Professor McGonagall, with a stern yet distressed expression, called for Dumbledore and proceeded to check on the students. Dumbledore entered the room with his usual calm demeanor and addressed Umbridge. Investigator Umbridge, may I inquire what my students have done to warrant such punishment? They violated the educational decree by assembling to create what they called Dumbledore's army, didn't they? Umbridge questioned, turning to a Slytherin student beside her. Had Pansy been present, she would have recognized her diligent boyfriend. That's utter nonsense, George protested vehemently. Fred joined in, exclaiming, We haven't done anything wrong. She's spouting lies. Is that so? Umbridge replied with a sinister smile. Turning to Dumbledore, she said, I have informed Minister Crouch about the situation. He is very interested in the matter of Dumbledore's army and is already on his way here. In that case, please allow us to relocate to a more suitable location to welcome Minister Crouch, Dumbledore suggested, his voice exuding centuries of wisdom. Umbridge's primary goal was to undermine Dumbledore. Everything else was secondary. Thus, she escorted Harry to Dumbledore's office. Harry attempted to speak to Dumbledore several times during their walk, but Dumbledore avoided eye contact. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by Barty Crouch Sr. and two Aurors, one of whom was Kingsley, whom Crouch seemed to trust implicitly. Dumbledore, Crouch greeted with a grimace. I've been informed by the investigator that you're attempting to form an army within the school. Crouch would typically allow Umbridge to manipulate situations to her advantage, but the accusation of Dumbledore organizing an army at Hogwarts was too serious for him to ignore. Upon entering the office, Crouch's demeanor was no less severe. Dumbledore, although you have resigned as the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, you are still bound by the law, he stated. What would the parents of these students think? Eager to prevent Dumbledore from outmaneuvering them with his eloquence, Umbridge stepped forward obsequiously. Minister Crouch, I have received a report and uncovered this behavior. Shall I bring in the witness? Umbridge seemed well prepared, leaving Crouch with little room to maneuver. She briefly exited and returned with a girl whose face was covered. Harry recognized her as Marietta, a friend of Cho Chang, whose face was marred by dense purple pustules spelling out informant. Harry recalled Hermione's clever modification to the original agreement. Umbridge recounted the process of whistleblowing, much to Harry's frustration. Enough, Crouch interrupted Umbridge, his gaze fixed on Marietta. Why isn't she speaking? I haven't found a cure for this condition yet, Umbridge admitted reluctantly, a hint of pride swelling in Harry at Hermione's spellcasting prowess. Sensing Crouch's growing displeasure, Umbridge quickly added, The Educational Decree No. 20 has been in effect for nearly 6 months, making any gatherings during this period illegal. Dumbledore, observing Umbridge with a polite yet keen interest, responded, If they did indeed continue to meet after the decree was enacted, they might be breaking the law. Just as Umbridge's smile began to form, Dumbledore shifted the conversation. But what evidence do you have to prove that such a gathering occurred afterward? As Dumbledore spoke, Harry noticed a rustle behind him and heard Kingsley mutter something under his breath. A brief moment of confusion crossed Marietta's eyes. Umbridge believed she had solid evidence. Although she couldn't make Marietta speak, she expected her to nod in affirmation. However, contrary to expectations, Marietta denied all allegations. Professor McGonagall was also present, participating in the questioning. It became apparent that Kingsley's muttering was likely a spell, influencing Marietta to answer truthfully. In a moment, Tea of Fury, Umbridge grabbed Marietta, spinning her around and shaking her with such force that for the first time, Dumbledore's expression turned into a scowl. Reacting to this, Umbridge released Marietta as if her hands were scorched, retreating hastily. I will not tolerate such rough treatment of my students, Dumbledore declared, his voice stern and unwavering. Barty Crouch Sr., observing the scene with a frown, watched as Umbridge hastily produced a list and handed it to him. Upon seeing the signature at the top, he inhaled sharply. Dumbledore, please tell me this is some kind of joke, he implored. Dumbledore, with a frankness that defied expectation, admitted, since it has come to light, I must acknowledge the existence of Dumbledore's army. What? Barty Sr. exclaimed, his tone grave. "You realize the implications of this?" "Indeed," Dumbledore replied, cutting off Harry just as he was about to speak. "But it is Dumbledore's army, not Potter's army." Realizing the gravity of the situation, Dumbledore announced, "It seems I can no longer remain at the school. I will resign and accept full responsibility." Barty Sr., with a look of mixed emotions, responded after a dry cough, "If you're willing to take the fall for your students, then I accept your resignation." The news of Dumbledore's resignation sent shockwaves through the school. Harry was particularly struck, feeling a deep sense of guilt for his role in the events that led to Dumbledore's departure. Meanwhile, the news was met with various reactions. John expressed surprise at the announcement, while Malfoy couldn't hide his glee, seeing it as a downfall for Potter and his group. John, however, noted that at least the situation was resolved peacefully, despite the unfortunate outcome. With Dumbledore's resignation, the position of headmaster was left vacant. Umbridge aspired to fill the role, but Barty Crouch Sr. saw through her ambitions, knowing her tenure would be short-lived. The logical choice for acting principal would have been Professor McGonagall, given her qualifications and status. However, her reluctance to take the position, combined with Barty Sr.'s relief, left the position temporarily unfilled. McGonagall's presence would have significantly hindered Umbridge's authority, especially given McGonagall's unwillingness to let injustices pass unchallenged. In a different turn of events, Daphne and a visibly upset Pansy approached John for a private conversation. They retreated to the Star Club to discuss a personal matter concerning Pansy's boyfriend, who had been revealed as one of Umbridge's lackeys. This betrayal was too much for Pansy, leading her to break up with him. John was initially puzzled by Pansy's distress, until Daphne explained she had used the Howling Curse, adding a layer of complexity to the situation. Pansy's discovery of her boyfriend's intentions to poison someone, evidenced by a vial of poison she found him with, raised serious concerns. After testing the poison on a mouse, which died instantly, the gravity of what her boyfriend was planning became clear, leaving them to ponder the potential target and the implications of his actions. Chapter 342, Acting Principal and Candidates. Who could possibly be the target of such a sinister plot within Slytherin? The question loomed large in the air. With Pansy's current status as the girlfriend of a minor character and the limited circle she could influence, the hero of Gryffindor was certainly out of the equation. So who in Slytherin was worth the effort of poisoning? Draco Malfoy. Setting aside the question of whether Malfoy was a worthy target, even with Lucius Malfoy's allegiance to Voldemort, it seemed unlikely. That left only one possible target, John Wick. The reason behind the certainty that Voldemort was behind this nefarious plan was simple. Only he would stoop to such despicable tactics. Poison, John mused with a light chuckle, turning to Pansy with a hint of approval. "Pansy, you've outdone yourself this time." Pansy blushed, unaccustomed to praise, and stammered her thanks. John reassured her, "Leave this matter to me. We mustn't tip our hand too soon." Daphne nodded in agreement, while Pansy, tears drying on her cheeks, harbored a silent hope that John would finally lift the Howling Curse. After all, hadn't he accepted her feelings that night at Daphne's, albeit under the influence? Before she could voice her thoughts, Daphne swiftly covered her mouth, silencing her with a smile. "Let's leave him to it," she said, dragging a protesting Pansy out of the room. Alone, John's gaze lingered on the departing figures. He toyed with a ring on his finger, murmuring, "The stage is set, now we just need the actors." Raising his hands, a magnificent crown materialized, adorned with the sinister glow of the soul-eating curse. A small, unwilling snake emerged from the crown, bathed in a green light. In the wake of Dumbledore's forced departure, Umbridge wasted no time in asserting her control. She began by summoning members of Dumbledore's army for individual interrogations, armed with photographs provided by a clever student. Rumor had it, courtesy of Malfoy's gossip, that Umbridge had secured a bottle of Veritaserum from Snape, still intent on expelling Harry Potter. Zhang Muji, the renowned Chinese philosopher, once said, "You point the gun at me, yet accuse me of bullying you," Malfoy remarked, puzzled by John's cryptic comment. "It means that those who are righteous are often the ones condemned by the world," John explained, setting aside the newspaper. The headline screamed of Dumbledore's confession to forming a secret army, leading to his resignation and disappearance. A sad end for the once great White Demon King, John mused. Had he been less kind and more ruthless, perhaps his fate would have been different. But then, he wouldn't be Dumbledore. Umbridge's lack of foresight and understanding of Slytherin's true nature was her downfall. She underestimated the man who had defeated Grindelwald and was hailed as the greatest wizard of the century. This oversight marked her as expendable in the grand scheme of things. For John, however, this was an opportunity. Turning his attention to the future, John considered the candidates for the next headmaster. He dismissed Professor Sprout and Professor Flitwick, despite their respective merits, as neither suited the role during these tumultuous times. That left the snake and the lion. Choosing the snake, John pondered. Snape? A twinkle in his eye betrayed his intrigue. Snape's dual allegiances to Dumbledore and as a spy for Voldemort made him a complicated choice. Yet his position within Slytherin and his complex character could serve the school's needs in ways others could not. Excluding the headmaster, Professor McGonagall remained. He gently placed the snake down, yet refrained from releasing it. Not Snape, but there's still a Slytherin left. He watched as Basil swiftly returned, dropping a letter into John's hands. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he quickly perused the letter. As expected, when faced with dilemmas, Slughorn, who values connections, steps forward to show concern. There was no one more fitting than him to be the last head of Slytherin. The letter, penned by Slughorn, voiced his worries about the current state of Hogwarts. Even Slughorn, who initially sought to avoid any interaction with John, felt compelled to reach out to him. John picked up a quill and began to craft a response. He highlighted that the Ministry of Magic was considering appointing an interim headmaster to oversee the school's affairs temporarily. Professor McGonagall was an excellent choice, but her reluctance to assume the headmaster role, due to the circumstances surrounding Dumbledore, was well known. John believed Slughorn would understand Professor McGonagall's stance. She had principles and would not accept the position unless it was absolutely certain Dumbledore could not return. However, Professor McGonagall was equally opposed to the idea of Umbridge serving as the acting headmaster. After sealing the letter, John handed it to Basil, who had just taken a brief rest. Before being summoned once more, Basil playfully tousled Malfoy's hair. "To Slughorn, and try to bring back another letter if you can," John instructed, rewarding Basil with small dried fish. Malfoy, fixing his hair, eyed John suspiciously. "John, where are you off to now?" "I need to speak with Professor McGonagall." John understood that a letter might not be enough to sway Slughorn, who still saw John merely as a student. However, if other professors also supported his return, the situation might change. Upon reaching Professor McGonagall's office, John knocked on the door. Professor McGonagall was taken aback to see him. John had never sought her out before. "Professor McGonagall, there are some matters concerning the school that I believe we need to discuss," John said, his smile unwavering. "I understand your reservations about certain individuals serving as acting headmaster, but the position needs to be filled." Professor McGonagall's expression darkened. "You're suggesting I take on the role of acting headmaster, Mr. Wick?" No, I'm aware of your concerns," John replied, his smile still in place. "That's why I'd like to recommend someone else." Intrigued, Professor McGonagall invited him in. "Do you recall Professor Slughorn?" John began once inside. "Slughorn?" Professor McGonagall remembered him, of course, but was surprised that John, a student, would bring him up. After all, Slughorn had retired, and Snape had succeeded him. John handed her Slughorn's letter. "Professor Slughorn has expressed his concern about Hogwarts' current situation. I believe he would serve well as the acting headmaster." Upon reading the letter, a look of surprise crossed Professor McGonagall's face. Not only did John have a connection with Slughorn, but it appeared to be a deep one. Slughorn's sympathy for John was evident, and John's suggestion seemed like a viable solution. If she herself was not to serve as headmaster, then indeed Slughorn was a suitable choice. After a moment of contemplation, Professor McGonagall asked, "What do you need from me?" "I hope you can collaborate with the other heads of houses to write a joint letter," John suggested, his tone calm and persuasive. Even the Ministry of Magic cannot ignore the united stance of Hogwarts' 4 househeads. I understand. Professor McGonagall nodded, her curiosity piqued. But why do you care so much about this? John chuckled. I thought you might have heard about the incident with Umbridge. At first, Professor McGonagall was puzzled, but upon mentioning Umbridge, she understood. Umbridge had attempted to suppress John, who had responded by rallying the Slytherin students against her. This story had circulated for some time. John was not one to remain passive. I can't help but wonder, Professor McGonagall mused, what it would have been like if you were in Gryffindor. Mr. Wick, Professor McGonagall mused, her thoughts wandering to a question she couldn't shake off. She found herself contemplating a scenario where, should John ever find himself at odds with Professor Snape to the point of dismissal, she would make an unprecedented effort to have him transferred to Gryffindor. This wasn't due to the boy's talent, which was undeniable, but rather because she saw in John the very qualities that epitomized Gryffindor House. John responded with a respectful tone. Professor, I have given this matter considerable thought, and I believe I have found my answer. His confidence was palpable as he added, yes, to be the king of Slytherin. Impressed by his determination and clarity, Professor McGonagall assured John that she would discuss his situation with the other heads of houses. As she watched him leave her office, she couldn't help but notice Draco Malfoy approaching John, falling into step beside him as naturally as if it had been preordained. It struck her then, watching them walk away, that John had an innate leadership quality about him, a magnetic pull that seemed to draw others to him effortlessly. He was, in every sense, a born leader, around whom others would gather, almost unconsciously drawn to his charisma and vision. Chapter 343, Longan and Snape's Memory. John had a hunch about the destination of the Veritaserum bottle. Malfoy's interest in Harry's affairs was so meticulous that he was already aware of Umbridge's clandestine attempts to interrogate Harry by adding Veritaserum to his tea. Did you eavesdrop to find this out? John asked, his suspicion evident. Malfoy awkwardly averted his gaze, a clear admission of guilt. However, it seemed out of character for Snape to resort to using Veritaserum so recklessly at Umbridge's behest, especially when it involved torturing students. John's skepticism grew, particularly because Harry was the main target, raising doubts about the potion's authenticity. Suddenly, a frisbee engulfed in flames soared towards John. With a raised eyebrow, he effortlessly caught it, the flames failing to scorch his skin. Looking up, he noticed more flaming frisbees and fireworks darting through the corridor, accompanied by the unmistakable cheers of the Weasley twins. Their antics always managed to lift spirits at Hogwarts. Without hesitation, John released the fireworks, allowing them to scatter freely. Malfoy's jaw dropped in astonishment at the spectacle. Approaching the Weasley twins, who were concealed nearby, John asked with a grin, "How many have you prepared?" George shrugged. "I'm not sure. We used everything we had. We initially planned to leave them for the students after graduation." Fred chimed in. "Thanks to Silverhand's generous funding, we didn't have to hold back." The fireworks continued to illuminate the castle, creating a dazzling display that, despite its intensity, caused no harm to the portraits adorning the walls. Umbridge, in a state of panic, found herself without any support from the other professors. John caught sight of Professor Flitwick among the crowd, discreetly cheering on the chaos, clearly delighted by the turn of events. Umbridge was left to fend for herself, with even Filch setting aside his duties to enjoy the show, perched on a stool with Mrs. Norris in his lap, expertly naming each firework, a testament to his frequent dealings with the Weasley twins. The students erupted into laughter as one firework transformed Umbridge's hair into an afro. Pansy's boyfriend attempted to assist her, but was deliberately obstructed by the surrounding crowd. Umbridge spent the entire day in a futile attempt to manage the fireworks, with the professors conveniently turning a blind eye. By nightfall, she had barely made a dent in the cleanup. For the Weasley twins, the day brought more than just mischief. A letter from their angel investor, Silverhand, announced an increase in investment due to their impressive inventions. George and Fred celebrated with a high five, followed by a jubilant tap dance in the lounge. The Gryffindor common room buzzed with excitement well into the night, until Professor McGonagall, her expression stern, ushered everyone to bed. Ron and Harry couldn't help but laugh, convinced they saw a hint of amusement on Professor McGonagall's face as she turned away. Harry, exhausted, yawned and headed to bed. Soon, his surroundings blurred, and darkness enveloped him. A light gradually emerged from the darkness, emanating from the wand in his hand. He found himself walking down a familiar corridor, the one leading to the Department of Mysteries. Despite his numerous visits, he had never opened the door. This time, however, the door swung open at his touch. He entered a circular room, which led to a rectangular chamber filled with the mechanical ticking of a clock, reminiscent of a second hand's relentless march. Undeterred, he continued forward until he reached a door at the room's end. Beyond it lay a dimly lit space, vast as a cathedral, with rows of dusty glass spheres on towering shelves. Harry's heart raced. He knew something of great importance to him was here. But then, a loud noise jolted him awake. The dark dormitory was alive with laughter. Seamus and the others were still discussing the day's fireworks, one of which had just exploded outside. Harry, his curiosity piqued, wanted to see more. Harry was overwhelmed, feeling as if the fireworks before him morphed into a massive serpent's head, engulfing him whole. Darkness enveloped everything around him, silencing the world. He attempted to call out to Ron, but found his voice trapped in his throat. "Let me go!" He wanted to scream as terror gripped him, feeling his limbs bound and his body adhered to a colossal stone, as if being torn apart. Tiny creatures seemed to crawl over his skin, sending shivers down his spine. "Don't run away, Tom," a detached voice echoed through the darkness, chilling Harry to the bone. He frantically looked around, yet the pitch-black void offered no visuals. "You should know that I possess the power to destroy you," the voice continued, unyielding. Amidst the darkness, a flame flickered to life, its golden hue so brilliant it seemed to make Harry's soul quiver in fear. "No, it's impossible. How can this be?" The screeching voice protested, as Harry felt an unbearable, burning sensation in his limbs. Straining his eyes, he saw the golden flame transform into a pair of eyes, exuding an indifferent and merciless judgment. Pain surged through Harry's scar, awakening him from the nightmare. It felt as though a fireball was lodged inside his head, threatening to burst. He buried his face in his pillow, struggling to calm the agony. When he finally lifted his head, the room was quiet, except for the distant sound of fireworks and the soft snoring of his friends, including a particularly tired Ron. Harry realized the importance of mastering occlumency, fearing the day his head might actually explode from such experiences. On Monday, Harry found himself distracted, especially during dinner. He noticed Cedric comforting Cho Chang at the Ravenclaw table, who was struggling with a friend's betrayal. Catching Malfoy's eye, Harry received a malicious grin in return. His stomach churned with unease, particularly at the thought of Snape, whom he hadn't seen in a while. Their last encounter involved Snape using his skills to shield his mind. Harry wondered if Snape harbored darker intentions. After dinner, Harry made his way to Snape's office, his steps heavy with dread. Upon entering, he was immediately reprimanded for his tardiness. Snape extracted some of Harry's thoughts with his wand, placing them into the pensieve with meticulous care. After a cold exchange, they were interrupted by a knock on the door. Professor McGonagall sought Snape for a discussion, leading to the postponement of their lesson. Left alone, Harry's curiosity was piqued by the pensieve, reminding him of his dream involving the Department of Mysteries. He wondered if Snape was hiding something crucial, perhaps related to the Department of Mysteries or someone named John. Despite his reservations, Harry's Gryffindor courage got the better of him. He approached the pensieve and gently prodded the silvery substance with his wand. It swirled rapidly, transforming into what appeared to be a skylight, through which Harry peered, driven by a mix of fear and determination to uncover the truth. He stepped into a room that bore a striking resemblance to an auditorium, much like the one he was familiar with. Overwhelmed by curiosity, he took a deep breath, feeling the chill of anticipation on his skin. With a sense of surrender to the unknown, he allowed himself to be enveloped by the cold darkness. After what felt like an eternity suspended in void, he finally landed with a soft thud on the floor of the auditorium. The atmosphere was eerily silent, the kind of silence that seemed to press against his ears. He slowly got to his feet, his eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered through the high windows. The auditorium, once filled with the vibrant energy of students and professors, now lay deserted, as if it had been forgotten by time itself. He moved cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the vast space, creating a rhythm that seemed to breathe life into the stillness. The rows of empty seats stared back at him, witnesses to a bygone era. He could almost hear the faint echoes of laughter and spirited debates that once filled the air. As he ventured further, he noticed a podium at the front of the auditorium, bathed in a shaft of light that seemed to pierce the gloom. Drawn to it as if by an invisible force, he approached with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. The podium, crafted from ancient wood, bore the marks of countless years, each scratch and dent telling a story of knowledge shared and wisdom imparted. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface, feeling the weight of history in his touch. It was in this moment, standing alone in the forgotten auditorium, that he felt a deep connection to the past, a sense of belonging to a legacy that transcended time. With a renewed sense of purpose, he turned to face the empty seats, imagining the faces of those who would one day fill this space again. The auditorium, once a relic of the past, now held the promise of future gatherings, of minds coming together in the pursuit of knowledge. And as he stepped back into the shadows, he knew that he was no longer just a visitor in this place. He was a part of its story, a link in the unbroken chain that connected the past to the future. Chapter 344, Image Collapse and Angry Snape. Harry watched as the original 4 long tables of the Great Hall vanished, replaced by 100 smaller ones. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the bowed heads of students engrossed in their exams. Among them, Harry spotted a younger Snape, unmistakable with his hooked nose, though his appearance was somewhat different from the man Harry knew. They were taking their OWL exams, and Snape, about 15 or 16 years old, was not much different in age from Harry himself at that moment. Professor Flitwick, looking notably younger, walked past a boy with shaggy black hair. Harry's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the boy. It was his father, James Potter, at 15. The resemblance between them was striking, the same thin face, mouth, and eyebrows. It was no wonder people often remarked on their similarity. Even their hair and hands were alike. Standing together, their height difference would be minimal. Harry also saw Sirius Black, his godfather, exuding a rebellious charm, even in his youth. Alongside them were Remus Lupin and Peter Pettigrew, completing the group that Harry knew as his father's closest friends. The scene shifted as Professor Flitwick attempted to collect the exam papers with magic, only to be overwhelmed and knocked down by the sheer number. Some students rushed to help him up, and the professor took the mishap in stride, not minding the laughter that followed. Following his father and his friends, Harry listened in on their conversation, amused by their banter. James's playful handling of a snitch, letting it fly a short distance before swiftly catching it, brought a smile to Harry's face. It was a trait he recognized in himself, though he never flaunted it as his father did. Under a beech tree, the group's dynamics unfolded further. Sirius expressed boredom, wishing for more excitement, while Lupin, ever the responsible one, suggested studying for transfiguration. Sirius's arrogant dismissal of the need to study contrasted sharply with the serious Harry knew, leaving him wide-eyed in surprise. James then directed Sirius's attention to Snape, who was gathering his exam papers. As Snape stepped into the open, James and Sirius confronted him, while Lupin and Pettigrew hung back, Lupin with a frown of disapproval. James's taunting greeting provoked Snape into drawing his wand, but James quickly disarmed him. Harry watched, stunned, as Sirius used a jinx to knock Snape down, turning the encounter into a humiliating spectacle. The mockery and laughter from other students that followed shattered Harry's image of his father. The cruel nickname they used for Snape and the taunts about his appearance were far from the noble image Harry had held. Snape's angry retort, filled with obscenities, left Harry conflicted. He wanted to believe Snape was just a nuisance, but witnessing his father's and Sirius's bullying behavior made it difficult to reconcile with the respect and admiration he had for them. This moment of realization was a turning point for Harry, challenging his perceptions and forcing him to confront the complexities of his father's character. James cast a spell that left Snape's lips covered in bubbles, sending a chill through him. "Let him go," a voice demanded. By the lake, a girl with dark red hair and strikingly green almond-shaped eyes approached, her expression one of anger. James's demeanor softened slightly. "How are you, Evans?" "Just let him go," Lily Evans, Harry's mother, insisted, her distaste for James painfully evident to Harry. "Why did he bother you?" James asked, feigning contemplation over a significant matter. "He shouldn't even exist if you catch my drift." Harry was disheartened to see his father behaving so cruelly, even thinking Malfoy seemed kinder in comparison. "You think you're being funny? You're nothing but an arrogant, bullying jerk, Potter. Let him go." Lily's tone was icy. "If you agree to hang out with me, I'll let him go, Evans," James proposed, his tone now mocking and flirtatious, as if he were a spoiled brat trying to charm a decent girl. "Just say you'll hang out with me, and I'll never bother the old snot again with my wand." In stark contrast, Snape struggled towards his wand, bubbles still foaming at the corner of his mouth. Lily made it clear she'd rather spend time with the giant squid than with James. At that moment, Snape managed to grab his wand and cast a spell at James. A flash of light later, James sported a bruise, and blood trickled down his face. In retaliation, James cast a spell that left Snape suspended upside down in the air. "Enough, enough," Harry muttered under his breath, his fists clenched as he heard the surrounding jeers. Lily pleaded with James to put Snape down, but Sirius's spell only added to Snape's humiliation. Harry was about to look away when suddenly a light caught his attention on the water. He saw a pair of vertical pupils surrounded by darkness before they vanished. It's him! Harry felt a chill. He was puzzled as to why this figure also appeared in Snape's memory. "I don't need help from a filthy little mudblood like her." Snape's outburst led to a rift between him and Lily. Lily also rebuked James, which provoked him to further humiliate Snape. Before Harry could see more, he was abruptly pulled from the Pensieve by Snape, who was visibly pale and agitated. "Enjoying yourself?" Snape's cold tone felt like a plunge into icy water. "Are you pleased, Potter?" Harry stammered a denial, trying to break free from Snape's intimidating presence. "Your father was quite the character, wasn't he?" Harry couldn't find the humor, feeling nauseated by the shaking. "Don't tell anyone what you've seen." Snape's loss of composure was evident. Harry attempted to respond, but Snape cut him off. "Get out! Get out! I never want to see you in this office again." In the Star Club, John held the crown, his complexion ghostly. Daphne's heart ached at the sight of him. "John, what's happened to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. John, struggling to stand, placed the diadem into another box. As the box snapped shut, he coughed up blood, alarming Daphne. "John, I need to get help," she said, but he stopped her. "Don't, just get the stars out," he instructed calmly. Daphne hesitated but complied, opening the bottle for John. As he drank, he choked and coughed up more blood, terrifying Daphne. "Live to death," John murmured, almost in a trance. After setting the bottle down, he stood, albeit unsteadily, and grasped Daphne's shoulders. "Don't speak of this, Daphne," he implored, his grip firm. Tears filled Daphne's eyes as she looked at him. "Are you going to die?" she asked. John offered her a weak smile. "I promise I won't die," he assured her, a statement that finally eased Daphne's worries. She promised to keep his secret. John, looking frail and ill, leaned in to whisper something in her ear, to which Daphne nodded, her tears held back. "I'm sorry, but I can't provide the enhancements you're asking for without the original text or specific content to work on. Could you please provide the text or details from the novel that you'd like me to improve?" Chapter 345, The Road to the Future and the Silver Handbook. Despite Harry grappling with the shattering of his father figure, the Easter holiday was nearing its end. John had vanished, leaving even Malfoy, who had sought him out several times, unable to find him. Eventually, Malfoy too became engulfed in his studies, as the 5th and 7th years were swamped with preparations for the Owl and Newt exams, respectively. While the Newt exam wasn't mandatory, the certification it provided was crucial for securing prestigious positions. Malfoy, seated in the library, observed the 7th years immersed in their studies, envisioning his own future post-exam. "Will we still be studying like this in 7th grade?" he pondered. a sense of dread about the future creeping in. Daphne, with a sharp retort, reminded him, "You need to pass the owl exam with good grades to even consider the newt. Without achievement, you won't qualify to be in their shoes." "Since when did you start sounding like Pansy?" Malfoy quipped, half-jokingly questioning if Daphne and Pansy had swapped souls, given Daphne's newfound harshness. Unfazed, Malfoy dove into his studies, only to realize he had missed a lesson while he was preoccupied with his rivalry with Potter. Daphne, without looking up from her book, pointed out, "You missed that lesson because you were too busy locking horns with Potter." Malfoy, determined to catch up, sought help from Cedric, only to be turned away as Cedric was busy tutoring Cho Chang. Left with no choice, Malfoy returned to Daphne and, alongside Pansy, endured her biting remarks while studying through the holiday. As the Easter break concluded, the Slytherin common room was littered with pamphlets on various wizarding careers, and a notice about mandatory employment guidance interviews for fifth-year students was posted. Malfoy, eyeing a future in Quidditch, picked up a brochure about the sport. "You're aiming to be a professional Quidditch player?" John's voice caught Malfoy off guard. Turning around, Malfoy greeted John, who had finally re-emerged, looking healthier. "Believe me, you wouldn't last a week in there," John joked, referring to Malfoy's earlier absence. "If you give me a firebolt, I could manage for a week," Malfoy retorted, affirming his dream of becoming a professional Quidditch player. John then noticed Daphne holding an Auror promotional guide. Surprised, he asked, "Are you planning to become an Auror?" "It's a field where you can truly make a difference," Daphne replied, her eyes betraying a hint of concern for John. "Plus, the head of the Auror office could be directly promoted to director." "You're really ambitious," Malfoy commented, impressed. Daphne, with a hint of pride, responded, "The Greengrass family has always been ambitious." Turning the conversation to John, Daphne inquired about his future plans. John, with a smile, confidently stated, "I plan to become a big shot." "Like a director, as Daphne wishes?" Malfoy interjected. "Perhaps even bigger," John replied, his ambition shining through, much to the admiration of Malfoy and Daphne. In Slytherin, ambition was not uncommon, with many students already having clear career paths in mind, often influenced by their family backgrounds and the legacies of the sacred 28 pure-blood families. Whether inheriting family businesses or carving out their own paths, the future held endless possibilities. The Greengrass family, with their extensive connections to many officials within the Ministry of Magic, exemplifies the distinct advantage pure-blood families often have. Daphne Greengrass, being part of such a family, was privy to insider information, a privilege that Draco Malfoy also enjoyed. The Malfoy family's wealth and connections even made the idea of Draco pursuing a career as a professional golfer seem feasible, highlighting the vast difference in opportunities available to those with the right connections and financial resources. In contrast, the atmosphere in the Gryffindor common room was less ambitious. Ron Weasley, looking dejected, was examining a pamphlet from St. Mungo's Hospital, which outlined the stringent requirements for becoming a therapist. A Newt score of at least E in potions, herbalism, transfiguration, charms, defense against the dark arts, he read aloud, feeling overwhelmed by the demands. "That's a very responsible position, isn't it?" Hermione commented nonchalantly, tossing him another booklet from Silver Cross Hospital, which seemed to have slightly less demanding requirements for similar positions. As they discussed the various career options, Harry Potter noticed a leaflet for Gringotts Spellbreakers, a position he thought Hermione might be interested in. However, she quickly dismissed the idea, expressing her disinterest in working with goblins or in a bank setting. The conversation shifted when Ron brought up Auror training, catching Harry's interest. However, their discussion was interrupted by Fred and George Weasley, who mentioned that Ginny had told them about Harry's desire to communicate with Sirius Black without risking interception by Dolores Umbridge, who was known for her invasive surveillance methods. Hermione, concerned about the risks of sending a letter or using the fireplace, which were both being monitored, was skeptical of finding a safe way to contact Sirius. However, the twins suggested using the Slytherin common room's fireplace, which Umbridge dared not monitor due to the influence of the pure-blood families. The twins playfully suggested that Hermione, with her impeccable reputation and the unlikely favor of the King of Slytherin, could be the one to gain access to the Slytherin common room for this purpose. Despite the potential risks and the knowledge that Sirius was not in good standing with some members of the Slytherin house, the plan was set into motion, showcasing the lengths to which Harry and his friends were willing to go to maintain their connections and protect their loved ones from the oppressive oversight of Umbridge. Hermione had an unexpected appointment arranged by the Weasley twins with John. "What? When did this happen?" Hermione exclaimed in shock. The twins exchanged mischievous glances. Fred, feigning a glance at his watch, suggested, "If you run from here to the covered bridge, 15 minutes should suffice." "You're insane," Hermione yelled, bolting out of the room. Harry and Ron quickly followed suit. Behind them, the Weasley twins chuckled and exchanged a triumphant high five. Panting, the trio arrived at the covered bridge, only to find John approaching at a leisurely pace. "Wait, Harry, let's stop," Ron urged, nearly causing Harry to stumble. Before Harry could inquire why, Ron, with a strained expression, whispered, "I saw Malfoy." Peering over, they spotted Malfoy grimacing at a potions book in his hands. The trio knew too well that if Malfoy noticed them, trouble would surely follow. Hermione, however, briskly passed by Malfoy, who spared her only a brief glance before returning his attention to the book. Once they reached the covered bridge, Hermione took a moment to catch her breath. Observing her flustered state, John hesitated before asking, "Is there something urgent you needed to discuss?" After regaining her composure, Hermione couldn't shake off the thought of teaching the Weasley twins a lesson for their prank once she returned. Chapter 346, Career Guidance and the Slytherin Fireplace. During this period, I had scarcely seen John. When we finally crossed paths again, Hermione greeted him with a warmth that was slightly tinged with embarrassment. "Hello, John," she said, her cheeks flushed not from shyness but from the exertion of running. John, noticing her state, expressed his concern. "Are you all right, Hermione? Do you need to take a moment to rest?" "No, thank you, but there's no need." Hermione stammered, internally cursing the twins for putting her in this awkward position. She found herself at a loss for words, unsure of how to broach the subject that had brought her to John in the first place. Sensing her hesitation, John offered, "George mentioned you had something important to discuss with me. I'm here to help if I can." Hermione knew John was someone who would lend a hand without hesitation. Gathering her thoughts, she said, "It's actually about Harry. He was hoping to use the fireplace in the Slytherin common room." "Harry?" John echoed, his curiosity piqued. "Yes, he believes—" Hermione trailed off, hoping to convey Harry's request without imposing. John, however, regretfully informed her, "I'm afraid that won't be possible. There's an issue with the Slytherin fireplace." Hermione was taken aback. "An issue?" "Yes," John explained. "The fireplace has been tampered with. There's an additional monitoring device, very well hidden. I suspect it's the work of Pansy's boyfriend, who's been using it to communicate with the outside world. Given the circumstances, it wouldn't be wise to involve Harry." Disappointed but trusting John's judgment, Hermione shifted the conversation to a lighter topic. "So, John, have you thought about what you'll do after Hogwarts? Career-wise, I mean." Leaning against the handrail of the gallery bridge with the wind caressing his face, John replied nonchalantly, "And what about you? Have you made any decisions?" "I'm still considering my options," Hermione admitted, feeling more at ease in John's presence. "I'm thinking about joining the Ministry of Magic. That could be a good path for you. Who knows, you might even become the Minister of Magic one day," John teased, a playful glint in his eyes. Hermione couldn't tell if he was jesting or not, but his words carried an encouraging weight. "Never say never, Hermione Granger," John added, his gaze drifting towards the horizon. In that moment, with the wind tussling his black hair and revealing his contemplative expression, John seemed almost otherworldly. "I should be going," he said, breaking the spell of the moment. "I wish you the best of luck with your Duels." Snapping back to reality, Hermione felt a surge of determination. "I plan to outdo you this time," she declared. John laughed. "I look forward to seeing that. Take care, Hermione." As he walked away, Hermione called out, "John, we'll always be friends, right?" John paused, turning slightly to show a smile. Probably, he said, leaving Hermione to ponder his ambiguous response. Later, when Draco Malfoy complained about the difficulty of their studies, John casually remarked, "You might want to put in some effort unless you fancy extra lessons with Snape." Hearing that Harry had been receiving private tutoring from Snape due to poor potions grades, Draco grimaced. "Fine, I'll try harder, but you'll have to help me with Transfiguration." As they walked, John mused aloud, "Draco, what would you do if I died?" The question caught Draco off guard, his attempt at a carefree smile faltering as he struggled to respond. "Kidding, aren't you?" John was silent for a moment before he chuckled and replied, "Of course. Did you really think I was going to die?" Malfoy let out a sigh of relief, quickly catching up and complaining, "Even if you don't want to help me with tutoring, you don't have to talk about dying, do you? If you don't put more effort into your Transfiguration studies, I might indeed die of frustration," John retorted with ease. The conversation shifted away from the previous topic. John had been summoned for a discussion about career guidance. Upon entering Snape's office, he noticed that the Pensieve had been moved. "Sit down, Mr. Wick," Snape instructed, having just concluded a conversation with Goyle. From Snape's expression, John deduced that Goyle's career plans were less than stellar. Snape's attention seemed more focused upon seeing John. He adjusted his position for a better view. "Wick, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on your future career so I can assist you in choosing which subjects to pursue in your 6th and 7th years," Snape said, his voice carrying its usual drawl. He eyed John intently. "Unlike Mr. Goyle, I believe you have more intellect than a hairy troll," Snape remarked, attempting humor that fell flat. Snape continued to scrutinize John, urging him, "Go on, Wick." "I might be looking for something different," John said with a shrug. "A specific role in a specific place isn't what I'm after." "So," Snape pressed, his tone sharp, "what do you aim to achieve on your own?" "Let's delve deeper, Wick." Snape uncrossed his legs, interlaced his fingers on the desk, and leaned forward. "What do you aspire to be, Wick?" "This doesn't feel like career guidance," John observed lightly, meeting Snape's probing gaze. "Which answer are you fishing for, Professor?" The office fell into a tense silence, the air charged with the silent standoff between them. John broke the silence with a short, quick laugh, shaking his head in amusement at Snape. "What's so amusing, Wick?" Snape asked, his frown deepening. John's gaze drifted upwards to the ceiling, bathed in light, and he smiled. "I just remembered my dream. To be the next Dumbledore," John said, his smile ambiguous, as if mocking both himself and Snape. "Unfortunately, that dream didn't last very long." He shifted his gaze back to Snape's astonished face and chuckled. "Now, I don't aspire to be anyone else. John Wick is simply John Wick. I won't be the next Albus Dumbledore, nor the next Tom Riddle." He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, and asked, "Professor, does this answer satisfy you?" After a moment of silence, Snape replied in a non-committal tone, "Wick, you may leave now." As John stood and walked to the door, he paused but didn't turn back. "What do you live for in this life, Professor?" Without waiting for an answer, he shrugged and exited. Stepping into the corridor, John's body shook, and he leaned against the wall, his forehead covered in sweat, his face pale. He took a deep breath to steady himself, then took out a silver bottle and sipped the medicine inside. His complexion gradually improved. "It really took a toll," he muttered, his expression turning cold as he pocketed the exquisite silver bottle and made his way to the auditorium, regaining his composure. Upon arriving, he accidentally bumped into someone. Looking down, he saw it was Pansy's ex-boyfriend, a third-year Slytherin, who was nervously picking up John's fallen silver bottle. "Sorry, I didn't mean to," the boy stammered, handing the bottle back to John. "It's none of your concern," John replied coldly. "You should focus on how to ingratiate yourself with those above you. Perhaps your methods of charming young ladies could prove useful." Pansy's ex-boyfriend's expression soured. After John walked past, a hint of hostility flickered in his eyes. As he entered the auditorium, he was greeted by the sound of commotion in the foyer. Dolores Umbridge's shrill, triumphant voice cut through the air. "Well, do you think it was amusing to turn the school into a swamp?" Hidden behind the distraction provided by Umbridge's fireplace, the Weasley twins had orchestrated chaos in the foyer, drawing an audience of students who had witnessed their deed. It was clear the twins had meticulously planned this act of rebellion. Surrounded and seemingly cornered, they faced Umbridge with defiant ease. It was amusing, yes, Fred stated boldly, meeting Umbridge's gaze without a hint of fear. Very well. Umbridge sneered, her grin widening. You two will soon learn the consequences of misbehaving in my school. Her school? It appeared she was under the impression that the Ministry of Magic would grant her ownership of Hogwarts. You know what? Fred interjected, a spark of mischief in his eyes as he turned to George. I don't think we're cut out for full-time education any longer. Fred, I share the sentiment, George replied, his grin mirroring his brother's fearless demeanor. Fred nodded. We ought to apply our talents in the real world, don't you think? Absolutely, George agreed passionately. Before Umbridge could retort, the twins summoned their broomsticks with a well-practiced Accio charm. The brooms, chained together, landed smoothly in their hands. Mounting them, Fred declared, this is the last you'll see of us. Don't bother keeping in touch, George added, as both twins shared one last iconic smile with the gathered students. With that, they ascended, their laughter resonating through the hall like the calls of mischievous magpies. The twins' flair for the dramatic was unmatched. If anyone's interested in purchasing a portable swamp like the one upstairs, Fred called out, soaring higher. Head over to 93 Diagon Alley, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. George chimed in, completing the advertisement. Stop them, Umbridge shrieked in vain. Pevs, do us a favor and teach her a lesson, Fred yelled back. The crowd erupted in cheers as Peeves, the poltergeist, materialized from the ceiling. With a flourish, he tipped his hat in salute to the departing trickster kings of Hogwarts. As the twins flew off, their laughter a final gift to Hogwarts, the crowd's cheers swelled into a thunderous ovation. John, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but smile at the swamp below. He whispered to himself, there's so much untapped potential here. I'll have Tong Mi invest more in these brilliant minds. In that moment, he was convinced that what the wizarding world needed most were eccentric spirits like the Weasley twins, true embodiments of Gryffindor courage and inventiveness. Chapter 347, Hagrid's Secret and Grop. As exam week loomed, Hogwarts buzzed with activity. The library was often packed, with students claiming seats for hours on end. The Weasley twins, before their dramatic departure, left behind a legacy that celebrated the human desire for freedom. Their ability to resist and remain unbound was admired by many. Shortly after their exit, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes opened its doors. After a year of preparation, the shop quickly became a hit, proving to be the most profitable venture for the silver-handed angel investment, as reported by Tang Mi. John wasn't surprised by its success, though he wondered how furious Umbridge would be. With exams less than a month away, the Quidditch match between Slytherin and Hufflepuff was scheduled for Saturday. Malfoy approached John, requesting to borrow the firebolt for Cedric, aiming to challenge the student council president who had previously dominated him. Cedric, accepting the challenge, was determined not to lose. Hufflepuff has you, and Slytherin has us, Malfoy declared with arrogance. Cedric, still harboring resentment towards Malfoy for a past incident, was eager to prove him wrong. The competition was intense, with both friends committing various fouls on the field. Even the usually fair-play Cedric resorted to foul tactics against Malfoy. The firebolt's speed was too much for Cedric, leading to a fall that likely resulted in a fractured arm. Malfoy, with a graceful glide, stopped in front of Cedric, taunting him with the golden snitch in hand. Slytherin's victory by 40 points was attributed to their cunning strategy, leaving little hope for Gryffindor in the upcoming matches. As the last weekend of May arrived, Gryffindor faced Ravenclaw. Malfoy's sneering prediction about Ron's performance was met with indifference by John, who declined an invitation to watch the match, opting instead to visit the Forbidden Forest. There, amidst the distant cheers of the Quidditch match, John encountered a Thestral, which affectionately rubbed its head against his palm. Surrounded by Thestrals, John was soon approached by Weiwei, a beautiful unicorn, who expressed concern for his well-being. Sensing his melancholy, Weiwei offered to lead John to Hagrid's secret. Deep within the Forbidden Forest, where the undergrowth was thick and the light dimmed to dusk, Weiwei navigated with ease. Unicorns, known for their speed and ability to evade hunters, moved swiftly through the forest. John followed Wei Wei, curious about what Hagrid had hidden in the depths of the forest. After walking for a while and catching their breath, Wei Wei looked around anxiously. John leaned against a tree to rest and asked, Wei Wei, how much farther do we have to go? There's still a ways to go, John. You're too weak right now, Wei Wei replied, her eyes brimming with tears. My father knows a way to help you. Clark can't help me, John said gently, stroking Wei Wei's head. But thank you for caring. Once they had rested, they continued on their way, navigating through the underbrush. John used the shattering curse to clear a path through the thorny bushes. Eventually, they reached their destination. Wei Wei approached cautiously and warned, That thing is dangerous. In front of them lay a huge black figure. I should hope so, John said, looking at the creature with a mix of resignation and concern. Wei Wei added angrily, He almost pulled my tail off. Hagrid still hasn't learned, John mused, observing the creature. He had thought Hagrid's penchant for stealing fire dragons was the limit, but it seemed he also had a fondness for raising giants. Though this giant appeared smaller than others, it was still a formidable creature. Hagrid probably thinks he's harmless and cute, John muttered to himself. The giant, a sleeping behemoth, resembled a mound of earth more than a living being. It's a bit on the small side, John observed, noting that the giant was no more than 16 feet tall. Compared to John's dragon form, the giant would seem insignificant. He not iced that the giant was bound with thick ropes, likely Hagrid's attempt to restrain it. It seems Hagrid has taken some precautions, John remarked as he approached the giant. Wei Wei, spinning around nervously, asked, What are you going to do, John? John drew his wand, his expression stern. This creature is not to be trusted. Are you going to kill him? Wei Wei asked, visibly frightened. John paused, then turned to her with a helpless look. I'm not a monster, Wei Wei. Oh, okay, Wei Wei said, lowering her head, realizing she might have overthought the situation. As they moved to stand in front of the creature, John understood why Hagrid often showed up to class with bruises. Although he didn't know this giant's name, John felt there might be room for negotiation. Just then, they overheard a conversation from behind the giant. If I go, I must tell someone because I need your help, and Ron's too, if he's willing, Hagrid's voice carried over. Of course, we'll help you. What do you need us to do? Harry's voice responded. Hermione, sounding terrified, added, Hagrid, you said none of them wanted to come. Realizing the giant was the cause of Hagrid's injuries and not just a mound of dirt, Hermione understood the danger. Hagrid defended the giant. He doesn't realize his own strength. He's much calmer now, not as prone to fighting. Hermione, upset, countered, If he didn't want to come, why force him? Wouldn't he be better off with his own kind? They all bully him because he's so small, Hagrid explained. Too young? Hermione questioned. And you want us, including John, to look after him? Hagrid, tears in his eyes, confessed. He's my brother, my half-brother. After my mother left my father, she was with another giant, and then Glop was born. Why haven't you told John? Harry asked, puzzled. Because John would frighten him, Hagrid replied, a statement that only added to their confusion. I'm curious too, Hagrid, a new voice interjected, causing Hagrid to nearly jump out of his skin. Chapter 348, The Horseman and the Sense of Oppression. Hagrid, who had been teaching Harry and Hermione how to care for Grop, suddenly froze, his face contorting into an awkward smile. John, he called out nervously. John emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable. He prodded the slumbering giant with his wand and asked, Is this the creature you've been hiding? John, you'll wake him with that, Harry and Hermione exclaimed in unison, their voices tinged with fear. Hermione even screamed, Get out of there quickly! John raised an eyebrow, let out a sigh, and asked, Hagrid, do you really think I'm that frightening? No, it's not that, John, Hagrid stammered, fumbling with his beard in an attempt to explain. It's more of a feeling, you know? His words were clumsy, struggling to convey his thoughts clearly. John looked at him blankly. So this giant is the one causing you trouble every day? Hagrid, tugging at his moleskin coat guiltily, clarified, This is my brother, Grop. It's not exactly trouble, he just can't control his strength. He was still trying to convince John of Grop's harmlessness when Grop stirred awake. Grop's face was large and intimidating, resembling a roughly hewn stone. His nose was short and misshapen, his mouth crooked, and his teeth jagged, resembling half-sized bricks. Upon waking, Grop's gaze immediately fixed on the beautiful unicorn, Wei Wei, who let out a soft cry and trotted out of Grop's reach. Only then did Hagrid notice Wei Wei's presence. As Grop reached out to catch Wei Wei, the rope binding him held him back. He turned his head in frustration and tugged at the rope. Hagrid quickly tried to calm him. "Grop, be quiet. Don't touch that unicorn." But Grop, like a defiant child, ignored Hagrid's pleas and pulled at the rope with all his might. "I say, Grop, stop that!" Hagrid yelled, trying to distract him. "Look here, I've brought someone to meet you." "Hey, you big oaf, look here!" Hagrid attempted to intervene, but Hermione pleaded. "Hagrid, don't!" Grop growled, ignoring them completely. John felt a headache coming on, as if he were standing beside a massive bear. Sensing another presence, Grop dropped the rope and reached for John with his enormous hands. "John!" Hermione screamed in terror. John, reaching his limit, turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as he growled, "Cease your actions, unless you wish to lose your hand." A draconic aura of intimidation emanated from him, causing Grop to roar and stagger backward in fear. To Grop, the man before him had transformed into a colossal dragon capable of devouring him whole, and he screamed in terror. Cowering in fear, Grop appeared pitifully vulnerable. "John, you've frightened him," Hagrid remarked with a hesitant expression, "but at least he's calmed down now." John glanced at Hagrid and approached Grop cautiously. With each step John took, Grop retreated, his fear palpable. Even Hermione, previously terrified, now saw Grop in a sympathetic light. Harry felt a strange reversal of roles, as if John were the true giant and Grop the unfortunate victim. Cornered and unable to flee, Grop crouched down, his cries becoming indistinct. "Hag," Harry inquired, puzzled. "Harger?" Hagrid, concerned, explained, "He's trying to say my name. He can't pronounce complex sounds." He rushed to Grop's side, comforting him. "Grop, I'm here. Don't be afraid. This is your friend too. You can call him John." Aware of John's gaze, Hagrid rubbed his hands together sheepishly, admitting, "It's difficult for him to pronounce your name." Seeing Grop still frightened, John extended his hand, sending a wave of calming mental energy towards him. Gradually, Grop's fear subsided, and Hagrid, eyes shining with gratitude, said, "Perhaps I should have introduced you to him sooner, John." "Who knew you considered me a threat?" John retorted with a sneer. Hagrid looked both embarrassed and guilty. Harry and Hermione, observing from a distance, now felt emboldened to approach. With John there, Grop's seemed less menacing, and the atmosphere lightened, marking the beginning of an unusual friendship. Hagrid, beaming with joy, suggested to Hermione, "Could you let him call you Hermy? Your name seems a bit difficult for him." Hermione, still slightly apprehensive, replied, "Anything is fine." Harry, on the other hand, was more adventurous. He approached the giant named Grop, finding him less intimidating than the dragon from the Triwizard Tournament. "This is John, Hermy, and Harry. They'll be your friends from now on. Grop," Hagrid introduced, his voice filled with a mix of happiness and regret. He wished he had brought John sooner, thinking it might have made Grop more cooperative. Grop attempted to repeat the names, a hint of apprehension in his voice. Hagrid clapped his hands in delight, though it was unclear if Grop's reaction was out of fear. The first name Grop remembered was John's. A unicorn, glowing with a soft light, approached them. "Unicorns," Hermione whispered in awe. "This is Vivi," John introduced. Vivi bowed her head to Hermione, gently touching her forehead with her horn as a greeting. Hermione felt a peculiar sensation at the contact. Harry thought Vivi looked familiar, reminiscent of the unicorn he had encountered in his first year. "It's time to head back," Hagrid announced, his mood a mix of elation and melancholy. He looked to John for confirmation, who nodded and thanked Vivi for her help. Vivi then gracefully walked back into the forest. As they made their way back, Hermione voiced her concern about Grop being discovered in the Forbidden Forest. John casually suggested they could claim Grop wandered in on his own, given the forest's vastness and the variety of creatures already residing there. Harry found this explanation enlightening, having not considered such a simple solution. Suddenly, Hagrid halted, alerted by the sound of horseshoes. He prepared an arrow on his bow as Harry and Hermione readied their wands. A deep voice announced their unwelcome presence in the forest. A centaur, illuminated by a soft green light, approached them, followed by several others. Hagrid greeted the centaur, Marjorie, cautiously. Bane, another centaur, angrily reminded Marjorie of their agreement regarding Hagrid's presence in the forest. Hagrid, irritated, questioned if he was the person they were referring to, recalling a past incident where he had intervened to prevent violence. Marjorie attempted to explain their laws and differences, but was interrupted by John, who stepped forward, challenging the centaur's stance with a calm yet authoritative tone. Even Bane, known for his temper, seemed fearful in John's presence. As tensions rose, Hermione expressed her concern, but John confidently dismissed the centaur's threats, implying they were seeking a confrontation he was more than willing to provide. His pupils narrowed beneath half-lidded eyes, and an overwhelming aura of menace enveloped the centaur. "Let's see if I can eliminate you all," he uttered, each word dripping with a chilling resolve. As the final syllable echoed in the air, John lifted his wand with a swift, deliberate motion. A burst of white light surged from its tip, striking Bane with the force of a lightning bolt, ensnaring him in its luminescent grasp. Simultaneously, the other centaurs loosed their arrows, each one aimed with deadly precision at John. However, as the arrows sliced through the air towards their target, an invisible barrier intercepted them mid-flight. The projectiles halted, as if colliding with an impenetrable wall, before harmlessly dropping to the ground. The scene unfolded with a tense, electric energy, as the confrontation between John and the centaurs escalated. Each move was calculated, each counterattack executed with precision, highlighting the deadly dance between magical beings, where the balance of power could shift in an instant. Chapter 349, The Gold Cup and Crown. John waved his hand lightly, and the arrow shattered, reversing its course. He dragged Bane away with a forceful pull, sending the centaur tumbling like pins struck by a bowling ball, their screams echoing through the air. With another sharp tug, Bane was dragged to John's feet. John looked down at him with a cold gaze. Weakness is not a sin in the struggle for survival, but arrogance certainly is. Do not dare to challenge a dragon with your fragile existence, John admonished, flicking Bane away with a mere flick of his wrist. He then sheathed his wand, his expression indifferent. The onlookers were stunned into silence. The centaurs, who had seemed invincible moments ago, were now unable to rise, crushed under John's imposing presence. Margaret, spared from the attack, could only watch in horror as John effortlessly subdued the centaurs. Lifting his gaze to Margaret, John offered a light chuckle. "You possess more wisdom than your companions. Return to the centaurs of the Forbidden Forest and relay what you have witnessed here," he instructed. Margaret, drenched in a cold sweat, felt as though he had seen a black dragon laying waste to everything in its path. Life seemed so fragile before such might. He nodded, struggling to find his voice, and John lifted the oppressive aura. As John walked past, the centaurs recoiled in fear, too terrified to even move. Approaching Bane, who had sustained the most injuries, John's gaze was cold and detached, as if looking upon an inanimate object. Bane, understanding his place, slowly lowered his head in submission. "Should Hogwarts students come to harm in the Forbidden Forest, I will hold the centaurs accountable without exception. Your intelligence should inform you that I am fully capable of making good on that threat," John warned, his sharp teeth bared in a menacing smile as he helped Bane to his feet, much like a dragon might toy with a lamb. The centaurs, now on their feet, remained silent as John turned away, his parting words hanging in the air. "Come on, I'd wager this year's Quidditch Cup still belongs to Slytherin." Hagrid, who had been prepared for a centaur attack, lowered his crossbow, his body numb with shock. Harry, observing John's departure, couldn't shake the feeling that Firenze had been right. John was a person to be wary of. Upon hearing the mention of Slytherin winning the Quidditch Cup, Harry couldn't help but retort, "Then I'll bet on Gryffindor." John's non-committal chuckle left Harry doubting his own conviction. After exiting the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid felt a weight lifted from his shoulders, his spirits buoyed by the resolution of a troubling matter. Meanwhile, the Quidditch match was drawing to a close. Harry and Hermione headed off to catch the end of the Quidditch game, while John returned to the Slytherin common room. There, he encountered Pansy's ex-boyfriend, lounging with a book, seemingly indifferent to the Quidditch fervor. It's rare to find someone uninterested in Quidditch, John remarked, settling onto the sofa and taking a sip from the cup Daphne had given him for Christmas. Pansy's ex-boyfriend merely smiled behind his book, unbothered by the commotion outside. Soon, Malfoy burst into the room, his platinum hair gleaming, followed by Goyle and Crabbe, who were proudly displaying the silver trophy. The room erupted in cheers, with Montague particularly overwhelmed with relief and joy at maintaining Slytherin's winning streak. Malfoy, ever the showman, boasted loudly about their victory, recounting how Gryffindor had managed a thrilling win against Ravenclaw. The Weasley siblings had performed spectacularly, with Ron showcasing remarkable skill as keeper and Ginny securing the win by capturing the golden snitch right from under Cho Chang's nose. "We were only 20 points shy of defeat," Daphne remarked, relieved that the game had ended in their favor. Malfoy, coughing awkwardly, admitted that his antics in a previous match against Cedric had nearly cost them dearly. Despite the Wea, Slay's explosive performance, Slytherin's dominance in Quidditch remained unshaken, their victory margin securing them the Quidditch Cup once again. As Montague watched Ginny Weasley's pursuit of the snitch, he couldn't help but admire her determination, a reminder of the fierce competition and spirit that defined the Quidditch season. Pansy Parkinson complained he almost used a jinx with his wand. If he had been overtaken, he would have definitely gone mad. "It's a good thing now, isn't it? We've maintained the record for the longest winning streak at Hogwarts," Draco Malfoy muttered under his breath. John glanced at Malfoy, sensing that if they had lost, Montague would have been the first to confront Malfoy about it. Despite Gryffindor's frustration with the point difference, Ron Weasley's exceptional performance had Angelina Johnson admitting she hadn't made a mistake in her choice. The celebration ended as the last Quidditch match of the season concluded, and the festive atmosphere that had enveloped the students quietly dissipated. The remainder of the term was dedicated to the library and the impending exam week. John seemed to be the only person at Hogwarts who didn't spend his time buried in books. At Silver Hand Manor, Tangmi looked at his boss and ventured a question. "My lord, when I was your age, I never dreamed of skipping school every day." John glanced at Tangmi, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "You know what I'm going to say, right?" "Well, if my name had been Johnny Yinsho back then, I probably wouldn't have wanted to attend school for even a day," Tangmi admitted with a hint of melancholy. As a loyal subordinate, Tangmi knew better than to apply common sense to his boss's actions. With less than 2 weeks before the exams, the other students at Hogwarts wished for extra brains and consumed pepper-up potion as if it were water. Meanwhile, John not only skipped classes, but also left school entirely to visit Silverhand Manor. Even Tangmi couldn't help but worry about his boss's academic standing, though it soon became clear that his concerns were unfounded. John entered the secret room hidden behind the manor's garden. The Hufflepuff cup was securely encased under a transparent glass cover, surrounded by a container holding hundreds of souls. "Release the souls," John commanded, his wand twirling as he drew the souls out like threads from a cocoon. In the unbreakable room, the Dementors appeared as if petrified by sickness. "There are quite a few more," John observed, noting that the balance of power between Dementors and the Soul Eater curse remained in his favor as long as the Dementors lived. Turning his attention to the Hufflepuff cup, John mused, "Gryffindor's sword is sharper, Ravenclaw's diadem is wiser, but what of you, Hufflepuff's cup?" He reached out to touch the cup, and upon contact, a powerful surge of magical energy was released. John's eyes sparkled with anticipation as he was enveloped by the magic. The silver ring on his right hand glowed, and the magic crystal within it created a magnetic field. Thousands of black threads penetrated the golden cup, eliciting a shrill cry that seemed to pierce the soul. John held his breath as the black threads enveloped the cup. "You should relinquish this object," John whispered. The cup screamed in defiance. "No, it's impossible. How could you?" With a flick of his wand, John brought forth the Dementor's soul. The black threads, intertwined with silver fragments of soul, transformed into razor-sharp scalpels, slicing into the golden cup. The fragment of Voldemort's soul within the cup resisted fiercely, but even the Dark Lord's aggression was no match for John's determination. Taking a deep breath, John's focus intensified. "Return of the soul," he intoned, his voice carrying strange ancient syllables that resonated deep within the soul. Atop the golden cup, a small green snake transformed into a handsome young man, who was immediately ensnared by the black threads. The silver scalpels cut into his body, which was fused with the golden cup. "You, the soul, cannot compete with me," John declared, his wand igniting the soul. The silver soul transformed into a golden flame, engulfing the golden cup. His eyes, now with vertical pupils, pierced through the essence of the golden cup as more and more souls were ignited. The screams emanating from the golden cup diminished progressively until, with a decisive tug, John extracted it completely. The small green snake, now a mere wisp of a spirit, attempted to flee. John, with a swift motion of his wand, transformed the soul into a thread of silk, binding it securely. As the cries of defiance and despair faded, the soul fragment was pulled into an obscure void. Having completed this task, John felt his strength wane once more. He collapsed, his complexion paling rapidly as a fleeting shadow of darkness flickered beneath his skin. The room fell silent, the only sound being John's labored breathing. He lay there, gathering his strength, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The golden cup, now devoid of its malevolent inhabitant, seemed less ominous, yet its presence was a stark reminder of the dark path John had tread. With great effort, John pushed himself to his feet, steadying himself against the nearest wall. His gaze lingered on the cup, a mix of triumph and sorrow in his eyes. He had succeeded in extracting the soul fragment, yet the toll it took on him was evident. The black flash under his skin was a grim indicator of the dark magic he had wielded, a reminder of the fine line he walked between light and darkness. Determined to not let his actions be in vain, John began the process of healing, both physically and spiritually. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but the resolve in his heart was unwavering. He would face whatever came his way, armed with the knowledge that the light within him could overcome the shadows. As he made his way out of the room, the golden cup in hand, John couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The battle against the dark forces was far from over, and he knew that he would need to be stronger, wiser, and more vigilant than ever before. But for now, he had won a significant victory, and that gave him hope. Hope that in the end, light would prevail over darkness. Chapter 350, Between Horcruxes and Strangeness. In the past, Malfoy Manor in Wiltshire was a sight to behold, with white peacocks strolling majestically across its grounds. The interior was equally impressive, boasting luxurious furniture, marble fireplaces, and gilded mirrors that reflected the opulence of its inhabitants. The living room, adorned with purple wallpaper, exuded a sense of grandeur and wealth. However, that sense of nobility had been replaced by an unmistakable gloom. A persistent fog had enveloped Malfoy Manor, refusing to lift all year, casting a shadow over the once vibrant estate. The manor had become a haven for some of the most malevolent individuals known to the wizarding world. Lucius Malfoy sat cautiously on the right side of the long table, his posture rigid with tension. Beside him, Lippy, known by the alias Drogon, felt fortunate to have secured a seat among the gathering. The Death Eaters, having escaped from Azkaban, had returned to their master, but their reunion was marred by the oppressive atmosphere created by Voldemort's foul mood. It was clear to all present that the Dark Lord was teetering on the edge of a dangerous precipice, and no one wished to be the target of his wrath. Even the most loyal followers, like Bieber, dared not meet Voldemort's gaze, their heads bowed in submission. "Who can tell me?" Voldemort began, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. His gaze landed on Lucius as he continued, "Lucius, tell me what we need to do most urgently." Lucius's body trembled slightly, and he swallowed hard before responding, his voice quivering. "Master, we need to infiltrate the Department of Mysteries to retrieve that object." "You're mistaken, Lucius," Voldemort interjected sharply, causing Lucius to shudder violently. Before the full extent of his fear could register on his face, Voldemort clarified, "Only Harry Potter can secure that object for us. We need Harry Potter." The room fell silent as Voldemort's voice grew irritable. "And that Johnny Silverhand who opposes us, he's like a vermin lurking in the shadows, and I yearn to crush him beneath my heel." The hostility emanating from Voldemort was palpable, making it difficult for those closest to him, like Lucius, to breathe. However, Voldemort's tone shifted back to a semblance of normalcy as the hostility vanished abruptly. Once we possess the object, we can easily exterminate that pest. Setting a strategic goal to acquire the mysterious object from the Department of Mysteries was one thing, but devising a plan to lure Potter was another. Voldemort, however, had already formulated a plan. His gaze shifted to the only individual in the room who was not a Death Eater, Narcissa Malfoy. "Narcissa, I require your assistance," Voldemort stated, his cold, serpentine eyes locking onto hers. Narcissa felt a chill run down her spine, but unlike Lucius, she maintained her composure and nodded slowly in agreement. As the meeting adjourned, Lucius cast a worried glance at his wife. Narcissa, feeling a surge of warmth from his concern, met his gaze. "Be careful," Lucius whispered, gripping her hand tightly. "Do not defy the master." Narcissa shot her husband a stern look, her expression hardening. After Lucius hurriedly left the room, his worry evident, Narcissa prepared herself to receive Voldemort's instructions. However, before Voldemort could speak, his expression changed dramatically. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he had lost consciousness. "Dark Lord?" Narcissa inquired, concern lacing her voice. Voldemort's eyes widened in surprise as he felt something inexplicable occur. "This is the second time," he murmured, his expression a mix of confusion and uncertainty. The phenomenon was sudden and unprecedented, leaving him to wonder if it was related to his Horcruxes. Yet the sensation was unlike anything he had experienced before. "What is happening?" Voldemort pondered aloud, his thoughts turning to the golden cup that had gone missing from Gringotts. The realization that he, the Dark Lord, was feeling uneasy was unsettling. Fear was an emotion he was accustomed to instilling in others, not experiencing himself. Regaining his composure, Voldemort's gaze hardened as he looked at Narcissa, a trace of killing intent flickering in his eyes. However, he quickly concealed it, remembering that Narcissa was not only Lucius's wife, but also Bellatrix's sister, and a crucial part of his plan. Suppressing his urge to act on his initial reaction, Voldemort calmly beckoned Narcissa closer and whispered his secret plan into her ear. Narcissa listened intently, her expression betraying nothing of the turmoil that had just unfolded before her. Narcissa's expression remained unchanged throughout the entire conversation, but as she exited the living room, her face twisted into a perplexed frown. "What a coincidence," she mused, finding it almost laughable how Johnny Silverhand and Voldemort had devised strikingly similar plans. John awoke gradually, sitting up while rubbing his forehead. Tang Mi was nowhere to be seen, and he had made sure no one could enter his sanctuary. Checking the time on his pocket watch, he wondered, "Has a whole night passed?" His throat felt scratchy, leading to a violent cough that ended with him spitting out a mouthful of black blood. As he stared at the blood, he calculated the time in his mind, realizing one must be exceedingly cautious to delay discovery and miss the chance for rescue. He commented, half in jest, "This plan is more ingenious than anything Crabbe and Goyle could conceive." Voldemort, perhaps due to the fragmentation of his soul, seemed to lack the cunning expected of the Dark Lord. Yet, his ability to embarrass the Ministry of Magic indicated he wasn't entirely devoid of intelligence. On the surface, Crabbe and Goyle's mission was to poison John as Death Eaters, but the real scheme involved another party. "Playing both sides, Tom, you excel in these underhanded tactics," John remarked, wiping the blood from his mouth. Upon picking up a golden cup that had fallen to the ground, the sinister aura it emitted vanished. "Hufflepuff's gold cup," he murmured, appreciating its craftsmanship. What Hufflepuff left behind is certainly not mundane. He examined the cup closely, comparing its craftsmanship favorably to Gryffindor's sword and noting its magical essence akin to Ravenclaw's diadem. Securing the gold cup, John now possessed 2 of the 4 Founders' relics, with only the Slytherin locket at 12 Grimmauld Place remaining. A smile crept onto his face as he thought of Voldemort. "Tom, our reunion seems imminent." By noon the next day, John emerged from the secret room. His black long-eared owl, Riddle, dozed comfortably in the lavender garden, with Basil, his other owl, beside him. Upon seeing John, Basil flew over, delivering an envelope. After reading the letter with a look of surprise, John burned it. Tang Mi, relieved to see John, approached him in the garden. "My lord, old Barty has come to visit," he reported respectfully. "That's quite the coincidence," John replied, straightening his clothes and donning a silver mask, transforming into Johnny Silverhand. He then asked Tang Mi for some snacks, specifically the ones given to Ozzy Herd previously. Tang Mi, slightly embarrassed, admitted his subordinates had purchased them at a discount. John's comment about the discount made Tang Mi worry about potential repercussions on his salary. In the study, old Barty Crouch sat with his short, meticulously groomed gray hair. John greeted him warmly. "Old Barty, congratulations are in order. Minister Crouch has been the most celebrated in the past 2 decades. Old Barty, clearly pleased, got straight to business, revealing the Ministry of Magic's need for repairs and refurbishments. John, aware of the ministry's budget constraints, was informed by Barty that savings from equipment maintenance and unpaid taxes had unexpectedly covered the costs. It was clear that those who had forgotten to pay their taxes were more afraid of old Barty's retribution than anything else, highlighting the intricate web of influence and fear that underpinned their interactions. The Ministry of Magic, having recently come into a modest surplus of funds, was finally in a position where Barty Crouch Sr. didn't have to gaze longingly at the statue of the magical brethren in the atrium, wondering when it would be dismantled and sold to alleviate financial strain. However, upon learning of Crouch's plans to refurbish the ministry, a peculiar glint appeared in John's eyes. With a sly tone, he remarked, "Barty, I have a proposal that could save you a considerable amount of money." At John's words, Crouch's demeanor shifted, his gaze settling on the enigmatic figure of Johnny Silverhand with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Chapter 351, Honesty and Strategy. Barty Crouch Sr. appreciated his friendship with Johnny Silverhand, not just for his candor, but also for their genuine exchanges. Silverhand had openly expressed his desire to diminish Dumbledore's influence, laying bare the true interests at stake. Crouch knew Silverhand was both ambitious and cunning, yet the allure of potential benefits was too tempting to resist. For instance, Silverhand's offer to renovate the Ministry of Magic building at no cost to the ministry itself was incredibly enticing. This arrangement meant that the ministry could enjoy a new building without financial strain, and any allocated refurbishment funds could potentially be redirected without scrutiny. Crouch pondered whether this generosity served any advantage to Silverhand, concluding it seemingly did not. There was no direct profit, no public recognition sought by Silverhand, leaving Crouch puzzled about his true intentions. "Your Excellency Silverhand," Crouch began, peering intently at the masked figure, seeking any hint of motive. "What are you truly after?" Crouch laughed at the absurdity of his own situation, acknowledging the leverage Silverhand held through his son. Yet, he knew their relationship was intricately tied to mutual interests. "Please, enlighten me. What are your plans?" Crouch implored, his gaze unwavering. Silverhand remained silent momentarily before responding. "You wish to know, Barty?" Crouch insisted, fearing the uncertainty of Silverhand's silence might breed suspicion and unease. Silverhand chuckled, a raspy sound, and began to remove his mask, an action that took Crouch by surprise. Even as the Minister of Magic, he felt a surge of nervous anticipation. As the mask came off, revealing a young, pallid face with familiar brown eyes, Crouch was momentarily stunned. "We've met before," he whispered, recalling their encounter at the Triwizard Tournament. "John Wick." The revelation seemed surreal. The idea that the Hogwarts student and the notorious Johnny Silverhand were one and the same person was unfathomable. Yet, as Crouch reflected, the connections became apparent. Both personas shared remarkable strength, intelligence, and mutual acquaintances, such as Dharma Alex Belby. Realization dawned on Crouch, and a chilling thought emerged. Why would Silverhand reveal his true identity now? In the magical world, numerous methods existed to exert control over others. Was this revelation a sign of confidence, or did it hint at a more sinister form of manipulation, such as the Imperious Curse? The cold clarity of his realization prompted Crouch to discreetly reach for his wand. Facing Johnny Silverhand, now unmasked as John Wick, Crouch wondered if he stood any chance against such a formidable opponent. His hand brushed against the wand, the symbol of his resolve and authority, as he contemplated his next move in this high-stakes game of strategy and secrets. A figure like Barty, seasoned by countless battles, found his heart racing uncontrollably at this moment. The dilemma of whether to shoot or wait ensnared him in its grip. Sweat dampened his temples, and his palms grew clammy. "No one would have guessed it was you," he said, struggling to maintain his composure as he stared at the face before him. John, with a deliberate slowness, removed his mask, each movement tugging at Barty's frayed nerves. Noticing Barty's heightened tension, John rose to his feet. Barty's focus sharpened, his eyes reddening with intensity. However, when Barty braced for action, John's words took him by surprise. "This is my truth, Barty. I'm dying." For a moment, Barty thought he had misheard. He looked up, disbelief etching his features as he took in John's pallid, youthful face. "What did you say?" "I'm dying, Barty," John repeated, spreading his hands in a gesture of resignation. "It should be obvious." He then unbuttoned his collar to reveal his neck, where dark, diseased veins marred his skin. Barty was torn between relief and disappointment. The news sent a wave of conflicting emotions through him, leaving him visibly shaken. "You're going to die?" he asked, rubbing his eyes until they were as red as a panda's. "Yes," John said with a grin. "That's why I removed the mask." Barty processed this revelation, realizing it was the only explanation that made sense. He hadn't anticipated this outcome among all the possibilities he had considered. Letting his wand fall to his side, Barty sighed. "You're still so young. Youth is frightening, isn't it?" John leaned back, his demeanor not betraying any fear of death. "So, you wish to do something for the Ministry of Magic in your final days?" Barty asked, moved by the notion yet surprised by John's intentions. "How long do you have? If you wish, I could commission a statue in your honor at the Ministry." "You misunderstand," John corrected, buttoning his collar back up. Seeing Barty's emotional reaction, he shook his head. "My actions aren't born from a sudden bout of kindness." "Then what drives you?" Barty asked, patience evident in his tone as he faced the dying man. "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth," John stated gravely. "To Tom Riddle, to Voldemort." Barty clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms, unaware of the pain. He fixed his gaze on John, who remained calm. "So you're asking to use the Ministry of Magic for a while, in return for its free refurbishment? Do you understand the gravity of your request?" Barty frowned. "You seek revenge against the Dark Lord and wish to borrow the Ministry of Magic for this purpose." He wondered if John's terminal illness had clouded his judgment. The idea of borrowing the Ministry was unprecedented in the history of magic. "Voldemort desires something from the Ministry, and he will come for it," John continued, his eyes alight with confidence. "This is both a deal and an opportunity for you, Minister Crouch." Barty's expression was conflicted as he weighed his options. "If you wish to persuade me, you'll need to offer substantial leverage." He knew the stakes were high. A misstep could jeopardize everything he had worked for. Yet, looking at John's youthful face, Barty couldn't help but think of the potential impact this young man could have had on the wizarding world had he lived longer. It was a regretful thought, especially considering Barty's own achievements, including his O in potions at Hogwarts. He realized, even in the face of death, he was still calculating his gains. Perhaps he was indeed heartless, much like his failure as a father to Barty Jr. John, sensing Barty's contemplation, confidently stated, "You know the Star Disciples are under my command, and the security team is equipped with the G series. These assets are formidable, but they represent just a fraction of what's at stake in the shadow of the Dark Lord's ambitions." "Lord Crouch," old Barty corrected with a stern gaze fixed on John. "Your proposal is intriguing, yet it lacks substance." John, unfazed, leaned back with a sly grin. "What if we bring into play the Chosen One and Dumbledore himself?" he proposed, his voice laced with confidence. The mention of Harry Potter, the boy who had vanquished Voldemort, and Albus Dumbledore, the wizard Voldemort feared above all others, visibly piqued old Barty's interest. John pressed on, his tone earnest. "Consider the Order of the Phoenix. They're essentially the antithesis of the Death Eaters. You're aware of their capabilities and influence." Old Barty's demeanor shifted as he pondered the implications. The weight of the decision before him was immense, involving figures of legendary prowess and organizations of significant power. After a moment of contemplation, he let out a heavy sigh, a sign of resignation or perhaps acceptance. "I will place my trust in you, Johnny Silverhand." "No, it's John Wick now, isn't it?" Barty finally conceded, acknowledging the gravity of the alliance being formed. John rose from his seat, extending his hand with a decisive gesture. "You've made the right choice, Minister Crouch," he assured, sealing their agreement with a firmer handshake. Their alliance marked a pivotal moment, one that could potentially shift the balance of power in the wizarding world. With figures like Dumbledore and the Savior on their side, John Wick's plan had just gained formidable allies. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but together they stood a chance against the dark forces that threatened their world. Chapter 352, Examination and Beginning. John Wick returned to Hogwarts on the day of the Owl exams, and curiously, no one inquired about his whereabouts during his absence. To the students, John's mysterious comings and goings were part of his allure. If he stayed in one place without any mystery, he wouldn't be the John Wick they knew. The Ministry of Magic sent invigilators for the exams, among them Griselda Marchbanks, the venerable witch who had also supervised Dumbledore's exams years ago. The exams were scheduled to last 2 weeks, with theoretical papers in the morning and practical assessments in the afternoon. Certain subjects, like astronomy, were uniquely scheduled at night to accommodate their practical nature. A palpable tension enveloped Hogwarts, with students frantically reviewing their notes and cramming last-minute information. Amid this atmosphere, Daphne approached John with a glass of milk, her concern evident. "You look very worn out, John," she commented as she placed the milk before him. John took a sip, offering a chuckle in response. "You know me too well, Daphne," he whispered, ensuring only she could hear. "But mark my words," he added, though the worry in Daphne's eyes remained. Nearby, Malfoy was engrossed in his own world, hands over his ears, trying to block out any distractions. He was determined to memorize as much of the extensive history of magic as he could before the theoretical exam commenced. The morning of the theory test saw the auditorium transformed. The long communal tables were replaced with individual desks and chairs to prevent cheating, with the invigilator's desk positioned to oversee the entire room. Students from various grades filed in, with John finding himself seated behind Goyle and to the far right of Malfoy. "Goyle, just tackle it as you normally would," John advised the visibly anxious Goyle in front of him. Goyle, surprised to find John behind him, confessed his nervousness and fear of being judged. John offered a reassuring pat on the back. "Ignore what others think. Trust in what you've learned, and if you're stuck, move on. The answers might come to you later." Comforted by John's words, Goyle managed to calm down. As Professor McGonagall signaled the start of the exam, John quickly scanned the test paper. His pen danced across the parchment, answering questions with a precision and speed that belied the complexity of the tasks at hand. Goyle, inspired by John's advice, skipped the questions he couldn't answer, hoping for clarity later. John completed his exam in just half an hour, a feat that left him with time to spare. As he sat there, a familiar panel appeared before his eyes, showing his magical power level. Despite his accelerated learning under the tutelage of the Oak Mage, reaching level 6 in magical power was still a distant goal. Professor McGonagall, patrolling the room, couldn't help but notice John's early finish. His composed demeanor stood out among the sea of frantic students. Approaching John, she glanced at his parchment and was taken aback by the quality of his answers. Her gaze shifted from the parchment to John, a mix of surprise and respect in her eyes. She caught sight of Hermione, still fervently writing, and shook her head sympathetically. Hermione's ambition to surpass John seemed more daunting than ever in that moment. Unaware of the silent exchange, Hermione felt a sudden itch in her nose, but resisted the urge to scratch. She had a fleeting sense that she was being discussed. Looking down at her own densely written answers, she bolstered her resolve to continue striving for excellence. As the 2 hours allotted for the exam came to an end, the students prepared to face the practical assessments that awaited them, each carrying their own hopes and apprehensions into the next phase of their examinations. Malfoy seemed to glide rather than walk as he exited the auditorium, still boasting about his mastery of the hiccup curse. Daphne, massaging her sore wrist, remarked, "I must have overlooked the memo about the happy curse." The afternoon was reserved for practical exams, with students being called alphabetically into a small room adjacent to the auditorium. John was among the last to be summoned. He noticed Malfoy striding out with an air of confidence. Practical tasks were evidently more to Malfoy's liking than the tedious theory. Griselda Marchbanks was available when John entered, so he approached the venerable examiner's table. "Ah, the last time we encountered each other was at the Ministry of Magic." "Welcome, John Wick," Marchbanks greeted him with a hint of nostalgia. "Professor Marchbanks," John replied, offering a polite smile. On Marchbanks's table lay an assortment of cups, flowers, and mice. In a voice that carried the weight of years, she instructed, "Please take this egg cup and make it rotate sideways for me." With a mere glance, the egg cup levitated towards John. He casually brandished his wand, and the egg cup began to flip sideways, much to Marchbanks' astonishment. "It's perfect," she exclaimed. "Now, could you make the cup fly and perhaps make the flowers within it bloom?" she requested. As soon as Marchbanks finished speaking, John waved his wand. Flowers gracefully descended into the egg cups and unfurled their petals. Marchbanks couldn't contain her admiration and clapped, an idea sparking in her eyes. "For an extra challenge, let's see some more transformations," she suggested. John raised an eyebrow, and the mice on the table soared into the air. They changed colors, green, blue, red, yellow, as flowers cascaded into cups and leaves unfurled like welcoming arms, each bloom showcasing a spectrum of colors. "Perfect levitation, color-changing, and growth spells," Marchbanks praised, her voice echoing the applause that filled the room. John offered a modest bow, his smile unwavering. With a snap of his fingers, the mice reverted to their original color and scurried back into their cage. The following day's focus was on transfiguration. John completed the morning's theory test in half the time allotted. In the practical exam, he astonished the examiners by transforming a ferret into a vase from which he summoned flowers before making the vase vanish with a flick of his wand. Malfoy, whose skills in transfiguration were notably weaker, didn't fare as well as he had the previous day, while Daphne emerged with a triumphant smile, having performed admirably. On the third day, the examination turned to herbology. As a master alchemist, John breezed through the tasks of repotting, harvesting, and extracting with ease, leaving the examiner somewhat desensitized to his proficiency. It was clear that John had no weaknesses in this area. Defense against the dark arts was the theme of the fourth day. Harry felt particularly confident, especially after impressing the examiners with a Patronus charm during the practical exam, which earned him a round of applause. When John entered for his turn, he was the picture of composure. Professor Tofty, fresh from evaluating Harry Potter, was intrigued to see what John Wick would bring to the table, especially after his remarkable performance in previous tests. Upon witnessing the manifestation of a silver albatross as John's Patronus, Professor Tofty couldn't help but applaud. "Brilliant," he exclaimed, visibly impressed. "You continue to surprise me, Wick." Sensing the professor's eagerness, John offered a light smile. "Would you like to see something even more surprising?" he inquired. Tofty, taken aback, eagerly asked if John had any other advanced spells up his sleeve. With a raise of his wand, John conjured a white light at its tip, which he then hurled forward. The light, imbued with destructive properties, morphed into lightning that darted through the air. "A stunning variant of the crushing curse," Tofty exclaimed, his excitement palpable. The spell struck the table, sending a resonant sound wave that obliterated the surrounding objects. Another variant. Tofty had never witnessed such a display of magical prowess, leaving him utterly astonished by John's capability. The curse dissipated, leaving the object it struck swiftly mending itself. John, with a swift flick of his wand, directed an invisible, razor-sharp blade towards a table, slicing it cleanly. Tofty, unable to contain his excitement, took a moment to catch his breath before exclaiming, "What an advanced cutting curse!" He attempted to mend the table with a charm, only to discover that the damage inflicted by the curse was irreparable. This revelation visibly altered Tofty's demeanor, prompting him to ask cautiously, "This spell?" "I created it myself," John replied. Tofty was astounded. Was he in the presence of a prodigy? While others were still mastering the basics, John had already innovated his own magic. "Incredible, I can vouch for that," Tafudi praised, giving a thumbs up. John acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod before exiting the room, leaving a lasting impression on Tafudi. Chapter 353, Excellence and the Dog Bite. On Friday, the Ancient Runes exam was scheduled. As a student who had ambitiously chosen 12 subjects, John found himself in the midst of exams every day. Professor Bathsheba Babbling, the runes professor, was visibly impressed to see John present for the exam. Overcome by curiosity, she approached John, only to discover that he had flawlessly translated all the runes on his test paper. The level of detail was so profound that it could easily serve as teaching material. Professor Babbling was taken aback, feeling a mix of admiration and a slight embarrassment at her own reaction. As a seasoned professor, she found herself momentarily overwhelmed, almost feeling the urge to bow in respect to John's expertise. The weekend offered no exams, but relaxation was far from anyone's mind. Come Monday, it was time for the potions exam. The morning's theoretical portion proved challenging, and John noticed even Draco Malfoy, known for his proficiency in potions, struggling with his answers. Among the questions, some delved into the less commonly discussed effects of compound medicines. John took his time, spending just over half an hour on his paper. Professor Snape, unlike other invigilators, did not hover around John. As a potions master himself, Snape recognized the significance of John's work on the Blood Demon potion. If John found these exams challenging, he would hardly be deserving of the Order of Merlin, second class. In the afternoon, John was once again the quickest to produce a perfect potion. Tuesday brought the Magizoology exam, which was John's easiest subject. He handled the practical tasks with ease, expertly managing bowtruckles and caring for fire crabs. Wednesday's schedule included astronomy, with a theoretical exam during the day and a practical session at night. However, there was also a divination test that afternoon. Upon entering the examination room, John found himself the center of attention. "It's him, the child with the celestial eye," someone whispered. "He made a prophecy while still in school," another added. The chief examiner, intrigued by John's reputation, decided to test him personally. As they sat with a crystal ball between them, the fog within began to swirl. John's vision of Hogwarts in mourning led him to predict a funeral. The examiner, eager for more details, was met with John's solemn advice that some things are better left unknown. In that moment, the roles seemed to reverse, with the examiner feeling more like the student. At 11 o'clock that evening, the astronomy tower hosted the practical exam. The conditions were perfect, with a clear sky and a gentle coolness in the air. As the students set up their telescopes, John felt a connection to the starlight, almost as if he didn't need the telescope at all. He quickly filled out his parchment, capturing the precise positions of stars and planets while others were still observing. From the top of the astronomy tower, John took a moment to observe the grounds of Hogwarts. He noticed lights in Hagrid's hut and whispered conversations under the castle gates. His attention was then drawn to the Homping Willow, which suddenly shook before becoming still again. It seemed as though someone was using the secret passage beneath it, though no one was visible. Suddenly, Tom Hagrid's dog ran towards the cabin, closely followed by Fang. They played until Tom abruptly stopped, sniffing the air and barking towards a specific direction. John watched intently, trying to discern what had caught Tom's attention. After a moment, the barking ceased, and Tom returned to the cabin with Fang. Meanwhile, someone from the castle gate moved towards Hagrid's direction, hinting at unfolding events. In the dim light of the evening, the atmosphere around Hagrid's hut grew tense as Dolores Umbridge approached with an air of arrogance. Her lips curled into a grotesque smile, a sight that filled Hagrid with disbelief and then deep disappointment. He attempted to reason with her, but his efforts were in vain. In a moment of impatience, Tom, a small dog, darted out and sank his teeth into Umbridge's calf. The force of the attack caused her to lose her balance and fall, her head striking a stone with a sickening crack. Blood began to pour from the wound, and her screams pierced the night, halting the students in their tracks during their exam. The scene was so shocking that even Professor McGonagall, who rushed over to assist, was taken aback. Tom, sensing the gravity of his actions, fled back into Hagrid's hut for refuge. Umbridge, in a state of shock, began to foam at the mouth, prompting McGonagall to rush her to the school hospital immediately. Hagrid, realizing the potential consequences for Tom, quickly scooped him up in a box and made a beeline for the safety of the gates. Meanwhile, the students, including John and Malfoy, were left to ponder the bizarre turn of events. Malfoy, in particular, was concerned about Tom's well-being and Umbridge's condition, but John could only offer vague reassurances. The incident sparked a mix of emotions among the students, with some finding a grim satisfaction in Umbridge's misfortune. Questions arose about Hagrid's actions, but John speculated that Hagrid was simply trying to protect Tom from potential punishment, reminiscent of the situation with Buckbeak. As the exams continued, John found himself caring for Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, during a curfew. The cat, seemingly grateful for the attention, purred contentedly as John brushed her fur. The incident with Umbridge had left the school in a state of disarray, with even Madame Pomfrey at a loss for how to treat the unusual wound inflicted by Tom. The severity of the injury and the mysterious nature of the bite led to speculation and concern, drawing parallels to past incidents involving magical creatures. Umbridge's condition was dire, with her body seemingly petrified and the wound refusing to heal despite numerous treatments. The school was on edge, awaiting a solution that might come in the form of an antidote or a magical remedy, reminiscent of the challenges faced during the Basilisk incident. As the school year drew to a close, the students navigated their exams and the aftermath of the incident with a sense of unease, wondering what the future held for Tom, Umbridge, and the rest of the Hogwarts community. Norris stepped out of the castle, his feet brushing against the grass. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead as he paused, looking up. The homping willow swayed ominously in the night breeze, its hidden passage beneath seeming like a gateway to another realm. With a determined stride, Norris approached the tree. He skillfully immobilized the homping willow, preventing it from lashing out, and made his way to the entrance of the passage. He proceeded along the dark, narrow path, the silence around him thick with anticipation. Eventually he arrived at the Shrieking Shack, the infamous building rumored to be haunted by restless spirits. The shack stood desolate, its windows like hollow eyes watching the night. Norris, undeterred by the eerie atmosphere, stepped inside, ready to uncover the secrets that lay within. Chapter 354, The Screaming Shack and the Mysterious Shadow. The Screaming Shack was enveloped in darkness, its walls adorned with horrific and hideous wallpapers that whispered tales of a werewolf's past presence. John treaded carefully through the shed, arriving at the room where the boggart had once been discovered. After the removal of a cabinet, a gap was revealed, but John chose to stand outside, his attention diverted to another room. It was evident that someone had recently been in the Shrieking Shack. The dust on the ground was noticeably disturbed. Approaching a door, the moonlight streamed into the room, casting a shadow on the ground that confirmed John's suspicion of someone's presence. However, he refrained from pushing the door open. "Tell me, what should I do?" he murmured, voicing his uncertainty. As if on cue, the moonlight was obscured by clouds, and the shadow vanished. John's gaze fixed on the crack beneath the door, from which a note suddenly slid out. Picking it up, he read the cryptic message, "Live to die." He studied the handwriting, glanced back at the door, but ultimately chose not to open it. Instead, he turned and descended the stairs. His attention was captured by a box. Walking over, he picked it up and cast a lingering look behind him. A figure stood there, its face obscured and indistinct. Exiting the Shrieking Shack with the box in hand, he retraced his steps to the Humping Willow. Beneath a raised stone, he discovered a vial no larger than a thumb, containing blood that glowed a bright red under the moonlight. The Star Club's stars shone as brilliantly as those in the night sky. Since its inception, the grand alchemy machine of the Star Society had never ceased its operation. Starlight illuminated the round table beneath the dome, which parted to reveal the armory below. The cauldron's contents bubbled continuously, the rising smoke oscillating between visibility and obscurity. John descended the stairs to the cauldron, observing the liquid's tumultuous movement. It seemed as though something was missing. Slashing his wrist, he allowed his blood to drip into the cauldron, causing the boiling liquid to cool rapidly. Opening his other hand, he unleashed a wave of magic into it. The liquid in the cauldron divided, transforming into two red dragons that danced within. As the liquid swirled, creating a vortex, white smoke emerged once more. This time, John drew his wand. Acting like a vacuum, the wand absorbed all the white smoke. The red oak wand took on an ethereal appearance, and John's right hand shimmered with a silver glow. Raising his wand, the stars in the dome intensified their light, converging into a beam of unparalleled brightness. The magic crystal, charged daily, unleashed its power, amplifying the magical force 100-fold. Slight cracks formed on the wand, and John, struck by the immense force, regained a healthy flush in his cheeks. He swallowed hard, preventing the blood from escaping his lips. The overwhelming magical pressure nearly enveloped him, eliciting a growl from his throat as he gripped his wand tightly. "The battle turns and the stars move," he declared, his wand bending under the strain, reminiscent of a bamboo stalk in the wind. The struggle was palpable, the red dragons in the cauldron showing signs of dispersing. John's anxiety mounted, his breathing grew labored, but with a Herculean effort, he directed the massive beam of magical light towards the cauldron. The wand, bending to an astonishing degree, finally channeled the magic into the cauldron. The red dragons, impacted by the magical force, roared to life. On the brink of collapse, John released the wand, which flew and embedded itself in the armory's wall. Yet John couldn't afford to rest. He steadied himself to stand. Holding the crown with both hands, he watched as a magnificent crown condensed in the brilliant rainbow-like starlight. Placing the diadem upon his head, he felt an indescribable change, though outwardly, everything seemed the same. Yet, deep down, he sensed a profound transformation had occurred. John possessed something beyond the ordinary. It was wisdom. A wisdom that suggested those who relentlessly chase desires might never attain them, while those who relinquish their grasp may find themselves already in possession. In that moment, John's actions were precise and deliberate as he approached the cauldron. His silver-gloved fingers gently prodded the body of the red dragon, causing it to burst open as easily as a balloon. He then reached into his pocket, retrieving a bottle of powder. As he sprinkled the fiery red substance into the cauldron, the previously turbulent liquid calmed instantly. Finally, a touch of the mysterious essence from the magician, John intoned, his voice taking on the quality of a sacred chant. This mysterious essence was known as emotion, a substance more refined than the finest dust. As it descended into the cauldron, the magical concoction evaporated in an instant, causing the bright pillar of magic to cease abruptly. The cauldron, no longer under pressure, broke free from its restraints and soared through the air before landing. Upon impact, a thick cloud of smoke billowed forth, enveloping the Star Club in a cool, mist-like embrace. John, unable to see through the dense white fog, moved forward until he found the cauldron, surprisingly still intact. A crisp cracking sound echoed as the cauldron split in two under John's gaze, its halves shattering into countless pieces upon hitting the ground. "Well, it's incomplete," John muttered to himself, a mix of hope and anticipation in his voice as he approached the remnants of the cauldron. His heart pounded fiercely, a physical discomfort that seemed to lessen with each step. Carefully, he began to collect the fragments, each movement deliberate, like a miner extracting gold from treacherous terrain. When he lifted a triangular shard, he noticed a blood-like substance seeping from beneath it. As the mist cleared and starlight illuminated the scene, the blood's color appeared translucent and pure. Touching it, John felt the surreal nature of his success. "Success!" he whispered, a laugh escaping him despite his expectations. Rising to his feet, covered in dust and disarray, he surveyed the chaos of the arsenal. Clutching the shard tightly, he raised it triumphantly, a wry smile on his face. "Fortunately, there is magic," he remarked, removing the crown from his head, which dissolved into starlight and vanished. After retrieving his red oak wand, lodged firmly in the wall, John exited the arsenal to find the mist had spread throughout the Star Society. "Well, it can serve as a new weather for the Star Society," he mused, raising his wand to disperse the mist towards the dome, which now resembled a sky with clouds. As the fog lifted, John felt a renewed sense of energy. The thought of a refreshing shower in the prefect's bathroom crossed his mind, considering his current state. However, glancing down, he noticed dense black veins covering his body. A mirror on the opposite side caught his attention. So it's just an illusion, he realized, observing his reflection. The black veins had spread to his cheeks, making his appearance grotesque. After coughing up black blood, he turned to find Myrtle emerging from the pool, her usual curiosity replaced with shock at the sight of him. "John?" Myrtle's voice, tinged with confusion and concern, broke the silence. She stared at John and the black blood, momentarily taken aback by the transformation before her. Hovering nearby, Myrtle inquired with a peculiar blend of curiosity and insensitivity, "Are you going to die? Can you become a ghost if you do?" John, taken aback by Myrtle's lack of empathy, found himself at a loss for words. It was one thing not to offer comfort, but to speak of death so casually was another matter entirely. Hogwarts offered a unique curriculum that was accessible to both wizards and muggles alike. However, there was a universal truth shared among all students. Learning could be an excruciating process. This was something Malfoy knew all too well. Though he often questioned the practicality of memorizing historical events like the Goblin Rebellion of the 18th century. Yet when faced with exams, all students, regardless of their background, stood on equal ground. As the March exams approached, the tension was palpable. Returning to the auditorium, Malfoy noticed John's weary appearance and couldn't resist teasing him. "John, did you have trouble sleeping last night?" he asked with a smirk. "Worried you won't be able to recall everything? I can relate." He then added with a hint of mockery, "And aren't you feeling warm? Why is your collar so high?" John shot Malfoy a withering look and retorted, "Perhaps you should focus more on remembering where the Goblin Rebellion of the 18th century began, instead of my attire." Malfoy paused, attempting to recall the information, only to realize with a sinking feeling that he couldn't. "It's hopeless," he lamented, his voice tinged with despair. John couldn't help but laugh at Malfoy's dramatics, though his laughter quickly turned into a series of harsh coughs. Malfoy's expression shifted from amusement to concern, but before he could voice his worries, the room began to fill with exam candidates, signaling the start of another challenging day at Hogwarts. Chapter 355, Examination Room Emergencies and Dreams. Today marked the final day of exams, not in the morning as before, but in the afternoon. After this test, everyone would be free at last. The results would be sent to each candidate via OWL in July. John entered the examination room, taking his usual seat and inadvertently catching sight of Goyle's head in front of him. The class monitor flipped the hourglass, signaling the start of the exam. The sound of quills scratching on parchment filled the room as everyone eagerly began, hoping to finish quickly and finally get some rest. The summer heat, combined with the challenging questions, caused sweat to drip from a student's nose, who frantically wiped it away. John, however, was in no rush. He glanced around the room, observing his classmates. Goyle was scratching his head, puzzled. Malfoy ran his hands through his hair, as if hoping the answers would magically appear. Hermione meticulously measured the spacing between words and lines with a ruler. Harry seemed distracted, likely by the bumblebees persistently bumping against the window. Ron exuded a calmness, as if leaving his fate to chance, regardless of whether his answers were correct. John marveled at how he could discern such a mix of confidence, luck, and guilt in Ron's demeanor. Daphne, who had received a quill pen from John, wrote her answers with focus and determination. As top students, Hermione and Daphne only paused occasionally to think. John began to write, his pace slower. After a few lines, he coughed, the sound echoing softly in the quiet room. The monitor March glanced at John, having been impressed by him more than once during the exams. Perhaps a little flu, she thought, dismissing it as the cough didn't seem to disturb anyone else. Time passed, and after an hour, John stopped writing. He reviewed his answers, admiring the elegance of his script on the parchment, which resembled poetry more than an exam response. Setting his pen aside, he began to think, finding the ambient noise of writing oddly soothing. Suddenly, John raised his hand, drawing the attention of all the examiners. Professor Tafuti, closest to him, asked with a hint of irritation, "Wick, what's the matter?" John replied, "I'm not feeling well." Tafudi suggested, if it's minor, try to endure it. The exam is almost over. However, John insisted, I think I need to go to the school hospital, Professor. Tafudi was visibly disappointed, his expression darkening. All right, but I hope you're genuinely unwell and not seeking an excuse to explore the hidden history of magic in the hospital. We've seen such tricks before, he said sternly. John smiled reassuringly. You have my word. As Tafudi approached to collect John's parchment, his steps suddenly halted, his face turning pale with horror. In the midst of the examination hall, a chilling scene unfolded as John's face, marred by dark, vein-like patterns, became the center of attention. Black blood, a stark contrast to the expected red, oozed from his eyes, painting a picture straight out of a horror film. Amidst the shock, he managed to smile, his voice barely above a whisper, If you hurry up. The sight of black blood spilling from his mouth sent a wave of panic through the room. To the school hospital, quickly. Tofty's voice broke through the eerie silence, his tone laced with terror. Hold on, kid. The urgency of the situation was palpable, yet the room remained deathly quiet, save for the hurried footsteps of the examiners rushing out to seek help. Sit down and continue the exam. Marchban's command, though firm, struggled to pierce the blanket of shock that had settled over the students. Despite her efforts, the atmosphere was irrevocably disturbed, with many students finding it difficult to focus. Daphne, in particular, found herself grappling with a rising panic. Her attempts to pick up her fallen quill met with failure. The sound of a table crashing to the floor signaled Malfoy's departure. Ignoring the exam entirely, he dashed out of the room, followed by a wave of Slytherin students. Sit down. Daphne's voice, authoritative and steady, halted their exit. She reassured them, continue with the exam. John will be fine. This incident won't affect him. Her words, though meant to calm, couldn't fully dispel the cloud of concern that hung over the students. Malfoy, however, remained unaffected by her attempts to restore order. Marchban, collecting the disrupted test papers, couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between John's and Malfoy's attempts. John's paper, despite the circumstances, seemed like a piece of art, while Malfoy's remained incomplete. Meanwhile, Harry found himself struggling to concentrate on the exam. The image of John, his face a mask of horror, replayed in his mind, disrupting his thoughts. He tried to focus on the question at hand, but the memory of the incident proved too distracting. As the exam continued, Harry's mind wandered, leading him down a dark, cool corridor reminiscent of the Department of Mysteries. He navigated the familiar space with a sense of purpose, eventually finding himself in a room filled with shelves and spheres, much like a cathedral. His journey through the Department of Mysteries was vivid, each step filled with determination. In a dimly lit room, Harry, or rather the protagonist of his vision, commanded a shadowy figure on the floor with a cold, high-pitched voice devoid of any warmth. Get it for me. Hurry up, he demanded. When the figure hesitated, he resorted to using the Cruciatus curse, the pain inflicted causing the creature to scream and contort in agony. The revelation that the figure was serious added a layer of horror to the already disturbing scene. This moment, a blend of reality and nightmare, left Harry and his peers grappling with a mix of emotions, the examination hall a witness to their turmoil. Chapter 356, Unchangeable and Still the Same. Why was Sirius there? Harry was initially puzzled, but his confusion quickly turned to worry as he witnessed Sirius screaming in agony. Sirius's face was marred with blood, contorted in pain, yet his eyes shone with an unyielding spirit. Unless you kill me, Sirius declared, facing Harry with a steadfast gaze. It will eventually, a cold, emotionless voice responded. But first, you must endure, Blake. Do you believe this is your limit? We have all the time in the world, and no one will come to your rescue. No, Sirius, Harry cried out, struggling against the restraints that bound him. He fell to the cold stone floor, awakening from the nightmare. Yet, the scene of Sirius being tortured haunted him, causing him to scream out loud. His scar seared with pain, drawing looks of concern and astonishment from Hermione, Ron, and the rest of the auditorium. Professor Marchban, looking visibly aged and concerned, quickly led the struggling Harry out of the auditorium. What happened today? It seems something has affected everyone, Marchban remarked, his voice filled with worry. I'm fine, Professor. I just fell asleep and had a bad dream, Harry stammered, still shaken by the vision of Sirius in torment. Marchband's expression softened. The pressure of exams, coupled with the situation involving John Wick, must be overwhelming. Perhaps some fresh air outside will help you calm down before you return. No, Professor. I've completed everything I could on the exam, Harry insisted, his mind racing with thoughts of how to save Sirius. He knew he needed to act quickly and seek help. Very well. I'll take care of your papers, but I suggest you take some time to rest, Marchband advised gently. I will, thank you, Professor, Harry replied, his gaze darting towards the stairs as he nodded in gratitude. Leaving the great hall behind, Harry dashed up the marble stairs, his heart pounding with urgency. He made his way to Professor McGonagall's office, knocking frantically, but received no answer. With Dumbledore away, Hagrid missing, and now McGonagall unreachable, Harry felt a growing sense of desperation. Who could he turn to for help? Harry! Ron's voice broke through his thoughts. Out of breath, Ron caught up to him, concern etched on his face. What's wrong? Are you ill? We need to find Hermione. I have something urgent to tell you both, Harry said, leading Ron to an empty classroom. She's at the hospital wing with John, Ron informed him, his voice tinged with fear at the memory of John's condition. We must go to her immediately, Harry insisted, urgency propelling them towards the hospital wing. The hospital wing was bustling, but there was no sign of Professor McGonagall. Snape brushed past them, his usual indifference in place. Harry finally spotted Hermione in the crowd and quickly pulled her aside to an empty classroom. What happened, Harry? Hermione asked, worry evident in her eyes. Voldemort has captured Sirius. He's being tortured, Harry revealed, his voice shaking. Hermione paled at the news. But how? Where? I don't know how, but I saw it in a vision. Sirius is in a room within the Department of Mysteries, surrounded by shelves of glass globes. He's at the end of the 7th row, shelf number 90, Harry explained, his determination clear. Voldemort is using Sirius to get what he wants from me. In the midst of their desperation, Harry shared the dire news with his friends. Voldemort has captured Sirius and intends to kill him, he said, his voice laced with helplessness. With no one else to turn to, Harry was determined to mount a rescue. How do we get there? He asked urgently. Ron, taken aback, stuttered. Where are you going? To the Department of Mysteries, Harry declared, his voice rising with determination. We have to save Sirius. Hermione, visibly shaken, tried to reason with him. Harry, how could Voldemort keep this from being discovered by the Ministry of Magic? Frustrated, Harry snapped. How should I know? The real question is how we get there. Hermione attempted to explain the impracticality of their plan, noting the department's usual occupancy by ministry workers. Harry, however, was undeterred, suggesting they could use the invisibility cloak, despite Hermione's reminder that he had never actually been to the Department of Mysteries and that his knowledge came from a dream. Harry was adamant, recalling how he had saved Mr. Weasley in what others claimed was just a dream. Ron found Harry's argument convincing, but Hermione remained skeptical, her attention divided as she worried about another friend in the school hospital. Harry, frustrated by her apparent distraction, insisted, Sirius is going to die, Hermione. Hermione tried to calm Harry, pointing out his tendency to act impulsively, recalling how he had once sought revenge against Sirius, whom he mistakenly believed to be his father's murderer. You don't understand, Harry retorted, his voice rising. I didn't have nightmares. These visions are real. That's why Dumbledore had me learn occlumency. Sirius was captured, and I saw it. As their argument escalated, Hermione brought up John, another friend who had repeatedly saved Harry and was currently suffering in the hospital. Her aggressive tone startled Ron and underscored the gravity of their situation. Just then, Ginny and Luna entered, having come to check on John and overhearing the commotion. Ginny's attempt to offer help was met with Harry's curt dismissal, which Luna noted as rude. Despite Harry's frustration, Hermione inquired about John's condition, to which Luna responded with a vague assurance that he claimed to be fine. The tension in the room was palpable as Harry grappled with the urgency of rescuing Sirius and the reality of John's condition. Hermione's insistence on caution and Harry's determination to act set the stage for a conflict between the urgency of the mission and the bonds of friendship. Hermione let out a sigh of relief, while Ginny appeared hesitant. She wondered if John was merely trying to comfort Luna. Observing Madame Pomfrey's tear-stained eyes and Snape's unusually high irritability, which led him to expel all the students from the vicinity, Ginny understood their reactions stemmed from concern. Once the atmosphere had settled, Hermione voiced a critical thought. "Harry, we must ascertain whether the dream reflects reality or if it's a deception orchestrated by Voldemort." Harry, initially ready to burst out in frustration, found himself somewhat pacified by Hermione's reasoning. "But how can we verify it?" he asked. "With the flu network. Umbridge is currently incapacitated in the hospital, leaving us unmonitored," Hermione suggested. Luna, with her dreamy voice, proposed, "We could use Umbridge's office. It's the nearest." Without further discussion, they made their way to Umbridge's office, surprisingly finding the door unlocked. They entered and promptly threw flu powder into the fireplace, establishing a connection to 12 Grimmauld Place. Harry, filled with hope, called out Sirius's name several times, only to be greeted by Kreacher, the house elf, who informed them that Sirius was not at home. This revelation drained the color from Harry's face, as he felt the weight of a seemingly inevitable fate bearing down on him. In an unexpected turn, Umbridge appeared in the doorway, her eyes ablaze with fury. She fixed a menacing glare on the group and demanded, "Where is Rubeus Hagrid?" The group was taken aback, not only by Umbridge's sudden appearance, but also by the revelation that Madame Pomfrey had discovered a leftover bottle of anti-petrification potion from a previous incident. It seemed that upon being rescued, Umbridge's first order of business was to confront Hagrid, the man she referred to disdainfully as "that dog" and the big man. The situation in Umbridge's office escalated quickly, leaving the group to navigate the perilous waters of her wrath while still grappling with the uncertainty of their original quest. Chapter 357, Thestrals and Urgency. Harry found himself trapped. "What are you doing in my office?" Umbridge demanded, her face contorting involuntarily due to a previous dog bite, which made her already sagging features appear even more menacing. I want my firebolt back," Harry managed to say, his voice hoarse. "Lies!" Umbridge seemed agitated as she pointed her wand at them. "I just overheard you. Who were you speaking to?" Her cheeks twitched, losing even the semblance of a smile she had, as she sharply accused, "You were talking to that giant!" "No, I wasn't," Harry tried to argue back, but Umbridge was having none of it. She stepped forward, grabbed Harry by the collar, and threw him onto the table with a thud. Anger surged within Harry, and he reached for his wand, but Umbridge was quicker. She snatched it from his grasp, holding it triumphantly. "Don't bother lying," Umbridge said as she tossed Harry's wand aside. "You have no right to control who I talk to," Harry retorted, his voice filled with defiance. "Very well, Mr. Potter," Umbridge said in her irritatingly whiny voice, feigning sympathy. "It seems I have no choice but to force the truth out of you." She pointed her wand at Harry, then moved to her desk to open a drawer. Upon seeing it empty, her frustration was evident. Her gaze then caught the cat plate on the table, and without hesitation, she aimed at Ginny. "Expelliarmus!" Ginny's wand flew out of her hand and into Umbridge's grasp. Not stopping there, the wands of the others were also forcibly taken. "Still trying to attack me?" Umbridge laughed maliciously. "You're all in trouble now." Her gaze lingered on the Weasleys. Another Weasley student gone. Ginny glared at her furiously, and Ron was taken aback by his sister's boldness. However, against an adult witch, Ginny was easily subdued. Umbridge used her wand to make a quill write on a piece of parchment on the table. "Professor Snape, please come to the office. I've caught Potter." The parchment folded itself into a paper airplane and flew off. "Now we have plenty of time to talk," Umbridge declared. Harry's expression turned grim. Snape, of course, Snape! He had forgotten that there was another member of the Order of the Phoenix. Snape entered with a stern look, and to Harry's surprise, there seemed to be a hint of sadness in his expression. "If this isn't important," Snape began coldly, "I don't have the time to concern myself with Potter's antics." Despite his words, Snape approached. "I need another bottle of Veritaserum as soon as possible, Professor Snape," Umbridge demanded, her face twitching in anticipation of revenge. "You used my last bottle for an interrogation," Snape remarked, glancing around the office. "It only takes 3 drops to reveal all secrets." Harry's eyes widened as he met Snape's gaze, silently pleading for him to understand his unspoken message. "You can brew more, can't you?" Umbridge was desperate. "It will take a lunar cycle," Snape replied impatiently. "You'll have to wait." "I still have the right to evaluate you," Umbridge threatened directly. Snape turned indifferently and hurriedly left the room. Harry, seizing the moment, shouted, "He's got Padfoot in that hiding place." Snape paused briefly, then quickened his pace and left. "Padfoot? Good, good," Umbridge muttered, panting like a bull in rage as Snape departed. "You've forced my hand," she said grimly. "Perhaps the Cruciatus curse will loosen your tongues." "Wait, Harry, we'll just have to tell her," Hermione interjected anxiously. Harry stared at Hermione in disbelief, not expecting her to suggest surrender. Ron and the others were equally shocked. Ron wanted to protest, but the sight of Umbridge's wand pointed at him silenced him. "Hagrid wants us to go to the Forbidden Forest," Hermione blurted out. "He has something for Dumbledore there." "Something? What is it?" Umbridge paused, her eyes widening with surprise. She had always wanted to contribute to Dumbledore's downfall, and if it could be confirmed that Dumbledore wanted. To undermine the Ministry of Magic would undoubtedly draw unprecedented attention. Hermione, her face buried in her hands, sobbed, yet Ron noticed the corners of her mouth curling upwards. Eager to act, Umbridge demanded, "Show me that weapon." Hermione trembled, much to Umbridge's satisfaction. With a flick of her wand, she bound Ron, Harry, and Hermione with magical ropes. "Now follow me, and no tricks," Umbridge warned. Harry, unsure of Hermione's plan, knew they had no choice but to comply. As hostages, they were escorted out of the office. Umbridge's face occasionally twitched, betraying her impatience. Hermione and Harry led the way, silently hoping a professor might intervene. Unfortunately, the corridors remained empty. Disarmed earlier, they were powerless against Umbridge. Eventually, they reached the edge of the Forbidden Forest. "Where is it?" Umbridge demanded impatiently. Hermione feigned timidity. "In the Forbidden Forest. The weapon is too powerful to be kept anywhere else." Umbridge, though skeptical, was driven by her obsession with overpowering Dumbledore. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Harry whispered to Hermione, seeking the plan. Loud enough for Umbridge to hear, Hermione mentioned using the centaurs against her. However, for reasons unknown, possibly due to past encounters, the centaurs were nowhere to be seen, leaving Hermione visibly anxious. "What are you up to?" Umbridge realized the deception, her wand now threateningly pointed at them. Hermione, sweating, stammered a response. Suddenly, a flurry of white shadows descended, striking Umbridge's wand hand and drawing blood. The wand clattered to the ground. A monstrous roar froze them in place. Umbridge's scream was stifled into a quack as a massive creature, resembling a giant cat with a peacock-like tail, blinked at them curiously. The group of white shadows landed squarely on the creature's head, rendering it motionless. Hermione, recognizing the creature, exclaimed, "Basil?" The creature, Basil, tilted its head in acknowledgement. "Basil, help us," Hermione pleaded. Harry worried about the risk she was taking. Umbridge, recovering her wand, attempted to curse the creature, but her magical ropes shattered upon release. Before she could react, a black shadow swooped down. A sharp beak and talons struck, lifting her into the air. It was a large black owl carrying Umbridge away until she vanished from sight. "Sirius!" Harry shouted, rushing back. Hermione and Basil followed, leaving the giant cat behind. Upon reaching the forest's edge, they reunited with Ron and the others who had escaped. "How did you get out?" Hermione asked, surprised. Ron explained that Basil had freed them by cutting the ropes in the office. "What do we do now?" Ginny inquired. "We're going to save Sirius," Harry declared. "But how?" Ron asked, embarrassed by their lack of a plan. Harry hesitated, searching for an answer. It was Luna who suggested, "We can fly over." Ron, frustrated, pointed out the lack of brooms. "You might manage without a broom, but we can't sprout wings," he exclaimed. Luna, undeterred, hinted at a solution that didn't require brooms, leaving the group intrigued and hopeful. Luna spoke with a calm assurance that seemed to settle over the group like a comforting blanket. "There are other ways besides the broom," she said. Ron, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "And what can you do? Go on a crooked ride snoring?" he asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. Luna, unfazed by Ron's skepticism, replied with a hint of pride in her voice. "The horned snorkack may not know the way, but it knows the places it has been. Remember what Hagrid told us? They are exceptionally good at finding the place the rider wants to go. As if on cue, Harry turned to find two Thestrals standing solemnly between two trees. Their presence was both eerie and majestic. The Thestrals stared straight at them, their intelligent eyes seeming to pierce through the veil of misunderstanding that often surrounded these misunderstood creatures. It was as if they understood every word that was being said. The group fell silent for a moment, contemplating Luna's suggestion. The Thestrals, with their skeletal bodies and leathery wings, were often a source of fear for those who could see them. Yet, in this moment, they appeared as noble steeds, ready to carry them to their destination with a loyalty that was as unwavering as it was silent. Luna's knowledge of magical creatures, often dismissed as mere fanciful tales, had once again proven invaluable. Her belief in the unseen and the misunderstood had opened up a path for them, a way forward that none of them had considered. The Thestrals, with their unique ability to find any location desired by their rider, offered a solution that was both practical and magical. As the group prepared to embark on their journey with the Thestrals, there was a newfound respect in their eyes for Luna. Her calm demeanor and unwavering belief in the magical world's wonders had once again shown them that there was more to magic than spells and potions. In this world of wonders, sometimes the most powerful magic came from believing in the unbelievable. Chapter 358, Star and Darkness. In the school hospital, Snape made his return. As he entered, Madame Pomfrey immediately approached him. With tears in her eyes, she asked, "Can you contact his family? He's been poisoned with a substance for which there is no known antidote." Snape, with a heavy heart, whispered, "May I speak with him?" "Be mindful of the time," Madame Pomfrey nodded, her professional demeanor resurfacing. "The patient needs his rest." Snape stepped into the quiet hospital room, the sound of coughing echoing in his ears. It was John's cough. The young man's face was marred by the poison. Black veins sprawled across his cheeks, each cough seeming to tear at his very lungs. Snape found himself at a loss for words, feeling a profound sense of absurdity. He had, after all, repeatedly warned Dumbledore about John Wick, drawing parallels between him and Voldemort. Both possessed remarkable talent, charisma, and a magnetic pull that drew others to them. Even Snape had found himself subtly influenced. John had transformed Slytherin House in ways Snape had never imagined possible, turning desolation into vibrancy. Under his influence, even the most arrogant students like Malfoy and Greengrass had become followers. This transformation had left Snape conflicted, torn between admiration and suspicion. He had witnessed John's ruthlessness, yet also his attempts at showing heart. But Snape had been too cautious to fully trust him, fearing the rise of another Dark Lord. Yet as Snape now stood before a dying student, all his prejudices seemed trivial. John's gaze met his, eyes clouded with a lifeless gray. "Hello, Mr. Wick," Snape greeted, his voice tinged with complexity. "Professor," John replied weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. After a moment of silence, Snape suggested, "The poison is man-made. Perhaps St. Mungo's Hospital could offer some relief." John's attempt at laughter quickly devolved into a painful cough, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Professor, you're a master of potions. Can't you see the truth?" he said, resignation in his voice. "St. Mungo's can't help me. Professor McGonagall is kind, but even she will be disappointed this time." Snape felt a deep sense of despair for John's condition. The poison was relentless, slowly destroying every organ in its path. Despite his expertise in potions, Snape was powerless to help. The realization brought a tumult of emotions: irritation, sadness, remorse, and guilt. He had once feared John might become the next Dark Lord, but now all he felt was the loss of what could have been his proudest student, Slytherin's brightest star. It was ironic. Snape had never truly supported or protected John, despite his role as head of Slytherin. His initial disdain, followed by fear and alienation, had only pushed John further into peril. "I'm sorry," Snape finally said, the words feeling foreign yet necessary. It was a rare admission from a man often seen as cold and unyielding. In that moment, Snape recognized not just the potential loss of a future Dark Lord, but the tragic downfall of his most talented student, whom he had failed to protect and guide as he should have. It had been a long time since such words were spoken. Snape, with a tone of regret, said, "I'm sorry, Wick. As your head of house, I failed to protect you adequately." After saying this, Snape's eyes were filled with turmoil, unsure of how to face the Wick family. "I will inform your parents and allow them to see you one last time." "No need." John shook his head, his voice steady. "Let's leave it as it is. Dwelling on it only brings more pain to others." Snape appeared moved, struck by John's acceptance of his fate. Unlike Voldemort, who desperately clung to life, John faced death with dignity. "Wick, you have until sunset," Snape said, a rare moment of connection between the Slytherins. "Professor, allow the Society of Stars to handle my affairs," John requested softly. Snape paused as he turned to leave, contemplating. John was vulnerable, and Snape could easily probe his thoughts with legitimacy. But the thought was fleeting. He couldn't betray one of Slytherin's finest that way. "Agreed," Snape said finally, granting John's last request. The door to the hospital wing swung open as Professor McGonagall rushed in, accompanied by Hippocrate Smethike, a renowned healer from St. Mungo's Hospital. "I've never encountered anything like this," Smethike exclaimed upon seeing John's condition. His initial irritation at being summoned vanished when he accidentally touched John's hand, which felt as desiccated as a mummy's. The slightest movement could cause harm, and his examination only deepened his concern. Finally, he shook his head at McGonagall. "I'm sorry, but he's beyond our help." Professor McGonagall staggered back, disbelief etched on her face. She had known John as a vibrant young man, and despite her lack of medical expertise, pleaded, "Please, examine him again." "It's an unprecedented poison, a concoction of numerous lethal toxins," Smethik explained, confirming the grim prognosis. "He has only until sunset." McGonagall's face went pale, her hand clutching at her heart. She looked to Snape, who nodded solemnly. It seemed all hope was lost for the young man. Overwhelmed, McGonagall exited the hospital wing, her steps heavy. Outside, the atmosphere was somber. Draco Malfoy sat against the wall, his platinum blonde hair disheveled, his tie undone. His gaze was fixed on the ground, lost in thought. Nearby, Daphne Greengrass was supported by her friends, trying to find solace in their comfort. John Wick, the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin and the pride of Slytherin, was facing his end. As the door opened, Malfoy looked up, hope flickering in his eyes at the sight of McGonagall's approach. But the pallor of her face foretold the grim news. As deputy headmistress, it fell upon her to deliver the heartbreaking update. Taking a deep breath, she faced the anxious crowd. "John Wick," she began, her voice faltering as she saw the hope in Malfoy and Daphne's eyes. With great difficulty, she continued, "We have until sunset." "Impossible," Malfoy shouted, unable to accept the reality. "He can't die. He's John." "Mortal Malfoy," Snape interjected, his demeanor calm. "John won't. He promised me," Malfoy protested, his emotions running high. Daphne, overwhelmed, leaned heavily against her friends. Snape, maintaining his composure, addressed Malfoy directly. "Enough, Malfoy." "John Wick has requested Daphne Greengrass's presence," Snape announced. At those words, Daphne, supported by her friends, made her way to John's side, determined to be with him in his final moments. Daphne raced toward the school infirmary, her usual composed demeanor forgotten in her urgency. She burst into the room, and her eyes immediately found John. However, the sight that greeted her made her heart sink. He was so gravely injured, he barely looked human. As she approached, she noticed his lips moving weakly, as if he was trying to speak. Daphne hurried to his side, leaning in to catch the faint, whisper-like sounds escaping his lips. Amidst the barely audible buzz that reminded her of mosquitoes and flies, she discerned two words that held a world of meaning between them. Our promise. Chapter 359. I died among the crowd. As the sun gradually descended, Daphne Greengrass wished for time to stand still, a wish beyond her mortal capabilities. "I don't want to be here," John whispered, his voice barely a shadow of its former strength. Daphne, finding a wheelchair, lifted John with an ease that pained her heart. He was far too light, a stark reminder of the suffering he had endured, to be reduced to such a state. Pushing the wheelchair through the castle, Daphne was followed by a somber procession of students, all struggling to reconcile the vibrant young man they knew with the fragile figure before them. The members of the Kunxing Club, Neville Longbottom, Draco Malfoy, Cedric Diggory, and Daphne herself, gathered by John's side at the Black Lake, a place of countless memories, of sweat and falls, of triumphs and defeats. In Slytherin, where pureblood supremacy reigned, John Wick, a muggle-born wizard, had managed to unite a group of rebellious teenagers with his undeniable glory. They were Slytherins, and in their quest for glory, they found their strength, their cunning, and their pride. John had transformed them, like sand into glass, making them shine brightly on the tree of Hogwarts. They were proud, treacherous, strong, all in the name of glory. As the sun set, casting a melancholic glow over Hogwarts, a heavy silence enveloped the group. John, feeling the weight of his eyelids and the poison coursing through his veins, murmured, "It's really cold." Draco, hearing this, instinctively removed his robe to cover John, only to discover that he was no longer breathing. A tremor of shock and disbelief ran through him as he gently draped his robe over John's still form. Tears flowed freely among the group as they mourned the brightest star among them, now fallen. Their cries, like burning grass, spread throughout Hogwarts, reaching a mournful crescendo. The professors, too, were visibly moved. Professor Flitwick dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, Professor Sprout whispered a prayer, Professor McGonagall leaned heavily against a post, and even Snape's eyes flickered with a rare moment of dullness. The examiners sighed, and Tofudi, overwhelmed with guilt, wondered if he could have prevented this tragedy. He felt responsible for extinguishing that bright star and questioned his right to continue in his position. "Send him back," Professor McGonagall finally said, her voice heavy with grief. "Let Stellaris handle his funeral," Snape added, the unspoken comparison to another beloved student hanging in the air. The bond of the Quinxing Club, beautiful yet tragically short-lived, was a testament to their unity and shared aspirations. But fate had not been kind to them. Perhaps in the future, other students would rise to prominence, but none could ever hope to replicate the astonishing impact of John Wick. The Star Society solemnly took John's body back, leaving Draco in a state of disbelief and anger, desperate to find the one responsible for this tragedy. Cedric stared at John's body, unable to accept his sudden departure, while Neville, despite his usual sensitivity, remained the calmest, his grief internalized. Their friendship had begun on the train to Hogwarts, a bond as profound as any. Had John been in Gryffindor, he, Neville, and Hermione would have been an inseparable trio. But even in his absence, the legacy of John Wick and the unity of the Quinxing Club would endure, a bittersweet testament to their brief but brilliant journey together. Daphne sorted through her tumultuous emotions and approached the round table that had once belonged to John. It appeared that the Star Society had sensed the loss of their leader. The dome above them was unusually dim, casting a somber light over the gathering. Starlight coalesced into an envelope that landed softly on the table. "Daphne, pick it up," Cedric urged, his voice tinged with solemnity. Malfoy's gaze, along with Neville's nod of encouragement, prompted her to open the letter. The letter began ominously. "If you're reading this, it means I am no longer able to act. This signifies our last opportunity is upon us. We are embroiled in a game wagered with lives. I implore all members of the Star Society to heed my final instructions." Percy and Fleur secured the Society's fireplace, linking it directly to the Ministry of Magic. "Daphne, I entrust you with conducting my funeral publicly so that certain individuals will be convinced of its authenticity. Neville, Draco, arm yourselves. Cedric, take my wand and use the fireplace to reach the Ministry. Kim will guide you through this mission. Daphne, do not forget our agreement." As Daphne concluded the reading, the weight of John's plan settled upon the room. Malfoy examined his hands, a gesture of readiness, while Neville stepped forward, a determined look replacing his grief. Cedric's voice, now more resolute, broke the silence. "We will carry out John's wishes," he declared. At his words, the round table revealed a hidden arsenal beneath. They stepped closer, and as the cabinets opened, weapons and 4 sets of clothes, each tailored for them, appeared. The garments floated towards them, dressing them as if by magic, while weapons gravitated towards their new owners. Malfoy received an emerald ring and amulets. Neville was chosen by Marvolo's sword, and a long box containing John's wand landed before Cedric. With their preparations complete, the trio paused before the fireplace, their emotions a whirlwind of determination and sorrow. Then, stepping through the flames, they vanished, leaving Daphne alone with John. Daphne tenderly touched John's pallid face, the coldness of his skin a stark reminder of his absence. She remembered finding him, collapsed, clinging to his promise that he would remain unharmed. Whispering to him, she vowed, "If you lied to me, I'll never forgive you." Together with the entire school, Daphne orchestrated a funeral that captured the hearts of all who had known John. The great hall was filled with white candles, each flickering in the hands of students and teachers alike, creating a sea of mourning for a figure who had been a protector, an inspiration, and for some, a first love. As they approached to lay white flowers on his body, the sight of John, marred and lifeless, was a poignant reminder of their loss. Even the professors, who had seen countless students come and go, felt the gravity of this moment. Snape, in particular, was confronted with the profound loss of a remarkable student, a realization that would haunt him with regret and self-reproach. Amidst the sorrow, Pansy's ex-boyfriend managed to conceal a flicker of satisfaction. He had always envied John's influence and saw his demise as an opportunity to ascend. Unbeknownst to the mourners, he had aligned himself with darker forces, believing that the greater the risk, the greater the reward. His ambitions, however, were shrouded in the same darkness that had claimed John, leaving the future uncertain and fraught with peril. The Dark Lord had resorted to poisoning a student, a drastic measure he justified as necessary. In his mind, such extreme actions were the only way for someone of his mixed heritage and orphan status to garner the attention he craved. He failed to consider why John's closest friends were absent. It's a common oversight, as grief often drives people away, unable to face the harsh reality of loss. He confirmed the death, his thoughts already racing on how to report this to Voldemort. In the dim light, John's body was bathed in a warm glow from the flickering candles, drawing all eyes to the scene. The room was heavy with the question, the death of John Wick, was it truly the end? In the silence that followed, a voice emerged, unheard by anyone present. Ding! This moment marked the beginning of something unforeseen, a twist in the tale that no one could have predicted. The voice, though soft, carried the weight of impending change. It hinted at the possibility that what they had all accepted as a tragic end might not be so final after all. The narrative was about to take a turn, challenging the assumptions and expectations of everyone involved. Chapter 360. Abnormalities at the Ministry of Magic. Thestrals would make excellent mounts if it weren't for their eerie appearance and peculiar traits. Despite the fact that the Thestrals of Hogwarts rarely ventured far, when Harry and his friends informed the Ministry of Magic of their intentions, they managed to arrive precisely at the Ministry's entrance, the iconic red phone booth. The group squeezed inside, and Harry, with his sharp memory, dialed the number he remembered from his visit with Mr. Weasley. Upon entry, an indifferent female voice greeted them. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic. Please state your name and purpose." "Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood," Harry responded swiftly. "We're here on a rescue mission, unless the Ministry has already taken care of it." The voice replied, "Thank you. Please collect your badges and attach them to the front of your clothing." 5 badges slid out from the coin return slot, each engraved with their names and the nature of their mission. It was clear the voice was automated. Following the voice's final instruction, the phone booth began its descent. The group was relieved they didn't have the bulky frames of Slytherin's Goyle and Crabbe, or they would have never fit inside the booth. Upon reaching the familiar Golden Hall, they were met with an unsettling silence. The fireplaces on the walls were unlit, and the Ministry seemed deserted. "The Ministry of Magic wishes you a pleasant visit," the voice said one last time as the booth's door swung open. Harry and his friends stepped out to the sound of running water from the Magic Brothers fountain, only to find the inspection desk unmanned. Harry led the way, sprinting through the hall. Despite Barty Crouch Sr.'s previous comments about some of the Ministry's outdated and neglected equipment, the place was vast. Yet the deeper they went, the more Harry's unease grew. He remembered the Ministry bustling with activity on his last visit. It was inconceivable that it would be completely deserted, even near closing time. They approached the golden grille door and headed towards the lift, their sense of foreboding intensifying. However, Harry's concern for Sirius overshadowed his apprehension, prompting him to press the button for the bottom floor. "Percy works here," Hermione remarked suddenly. "Ron mentioned he's a workaholic. He might still be around." Harry replied anxiously, "We don't have time for that." Hermione fell silent after his response, while Ginny pondered. Percy had always been kind to her, the sole sister among many brothers. She noted the button for the 5th floor, thinking it might be useful later. Luna seemed as if she had wandered into the ministry by accident, and Ginny felt a protective urge towards her. The elevator reached the Department of Mysteries, and the gate opened to reveal an empty corridor with a black door at the end, just like in Harry's dreams. "Let's go," Harry whispered, as though afraid of being overheard. They were only a few feet from the black door when Harry remembered Hermione's suggestion. Actually, Hermione was right. Maybe we could look for Percy and then... "I don't see a problem with that plan, but I have a question," Ron interjected. "How do we regroup if Percy isn't here and we end up separated again?" Ron seemed to read Harry's mind. "Don't even think about leaving us behind, mate." Harry turned to face his friends, noting their determined expressions. In that moment, he realized Hermione was correct. He often acted impulsively. Although he wanted to face the danger alone, he acknowledged the strength in unity and the value of his friends' support. Harry's companions remained unflinching as they now stood before the door, leaving them no choice but to proceed. Harry approached the black door, as if in a trance, and as it opened, they stepped into a large circular room. The walls were adorned with many identical black doors, each lacking any form of marking or handle. Scattered along the walls were stick candles emitting a blue flame, casting a cold light that reflected off the polished marble floor, giving it the appearance of dark water's surface. "Who closed the door?" Harry immediately regretted his words as Ron shut the door behind them, plunging the room into near darkness, illuminated only by the dim light of the flames. Harry's desire was to quickly traverse the room, but at that moment, the 12 doors from his dream began to swing open. It was the walls themselves that were spinning. When they came to a stop, it was impossible to discern which door they had entered through. In a moment of necessity for calm, Harry and his friends realized they could no longer identify their entry point and would have to choose a door at random. They entered a room that, perhaps due to the darkness of the previous one, seemed much brighter. This room lacked the flickering lights seen in Harry's dreams, containing only a few tables and a massive glass tank in the center, large enough to accommodate them all. The tank was filled with a dark green liquid, within which floated many pearly white objects. Ginny mistook them for fish, Luna for quivering maggots, but Hermione immediately recognized them for what they were: brains. The sight of brains lazily swimming was far from pleasant. "Let's get out of here," Harry said. "This isn't the right place. We need to find another door." "There are more doors here too," Ron observed, pointing to the surrounding walls, a realization that disheartened Harry. The vastness of the Department of Mysteries was unknown, as was the number of such rooms. Yet, this place differed from the room in his dream, prompting him to lead everyone back to the dark room. As they were about to close the door, Hermione loudly intervened. She used her wand to mark the door, indicating it had been opened. Her cleverness impressed her friends, affirming her intelligence. Once the door was closed and began to turn again, they could immediately identify the door they had entered through. Harry chose another door, his friends following closely with wands at the ready. This new room was larger than the previous, rectangular in shape, with a huge stone pit at its center, about 20 feet deep, surrounded by stepped stone benches. They found themselves at the very top, and Harry was reminded of the Wizengamot courtroom, though this place was larger and lacked the chained chair in the center. Instead, there was a high platform with a stone arch, ancient, dilapidated, and seemingly defying gravity as it stood without any visible support. A tattered black curtain fluttered gently in the still air. "Who's there?" Harry called out suddenly, descending the stone benches to the pit's bottom. "Sirius?" He thought he heard voices coming from the arch, but there was nothing, only murmurs he couldn't understand. "Harry, let's go, shall we?" Hermione urged, her voice laced with concern. Fixated on the arch, ignored Hermione's outstretched hand, causing her distress. The Department of Mysteries was a place of great importance and mystery within the Ministry of Magic, its magic unpredictable in whom it might affect. Luna, too, seemed entranced, exacerbating Hermione's frustration. "We're here to save Sirius, not to stare at that archway." Hermione's words finally broke through to Harry, reminding him of their mission. Reluctantly, Harry stepped away from the dais, only to turn around and find Ginny stood motionless, rooted to the spot. Without hesitation, Hermione approached and gently guided Ginny away, her actions swift yet considerate. Ron, caught in a moment of indecision, finally spoke up, his voice laced with concern. "Could you be a bit gentler? That's my sister, after all." Time was of the essence, and Harry, visibly agitated, struggled to maintain his composure. As they made their way out, Harry turned to Hermione with a puzzled look. "Do you have any idea what that was about?" he asked, hoping for some insight. Hermione met his gaze with an equally perplexed expression. "How could I possibly know?" she replied, her too, reflecting her confusion. They left a mark on the door before closing it once more, and the wall revolved again, sealing the room behind them. After a brief pause, Harry approached another door. He pushed against it, but the door remained firmly shut. Their anticipation grew. This resistance hinted they might be on the right track. Hermione attempted to open it with the unlocking charm, but to no avail. Harry, remembering the knife Sirius had given him, a tool more potent than any unlocking charm, capable of unlocking any lock, decided to give it a try. However, as he inserted the knife into the door's crevice, not only did the door refuse to budge, but the knife also disintegrated. They were stumped, a turn of events Hermione hadn't anticipated, especially since Harry had dreamt of passing through this very obstacle. Undeterred, they marked the door and watched as the wall rotated once more. When it came to a halt, Harry, driven by a mix of determination and excitement, pushed open another door. The sight that greeted him made his heart leap. The familiar, dancing spot of light he had seen in his dream was right there before him. "You got it right," he exclaimed, unable to contain his excitement. Energized by this discovery, they quickened their pace, running towards another door that had appeared in Harry's dream, hopeful that this time they would find what they were searching for.